Welcome to Covering Our Bases. Next to Mariners, highlights and headlines with unique context from every MLB team's perspective. Now, as we cover our bases, we aim to entertain, engage, and, of course, educate the average fan who doesn't have the time to keep track of the other 29 teams around our league. Expect the fun storylines, patterns, predictions, and pageantry of Major League Baseball to be present at all times. He's NL Dan Harrow. I'm AL Warren Sprague. And Dan, I can't believe so many of these trade chips are still on the table. Teams are keeping their poker cards close to their chest. We are 5 days away from the trade deadline, Dan, and most of our projected movers haven't moved. We've heard the rumors that a lot of the teams around the league still think they're in contendership enough that they may not be moving the pieces we expected. And man, everything and everyone's heads are swirling. Dan, let's say the trade deadline was today and 3 moves needed to be made. Give me your most expected trio of players to move on from the teams they're on, and who are they going to uplift on the road to October, Dan?
Oof, tough question, Warren. But if I had to really commit to 3 names, pretty confident in one of them. I'm going to have to go with my own Mets. It's got to be Tanner Scott from the Marlins. Ooh. I think the Marlins are definitely going to sell on him. I think the Mets are one of the higher bidders. I think it's a good move for them. So I would commit to that one. And another one I could almost guarantee, Detroit's going to be making a lot of moves. Let's say Jack Flaherty is a good rental piece, and 2 teams looking for rentals are Houston and Milwaukee right now, Warren. If I had to commit to one, I'm going to say Milwaukee because I think they'd pay the price for it to try and lock down the division. So I'd say that. Well, and a third one, I'll give you a treat, Warren. It's going to be Jazz Chisholm, also from Miami to Seattle. I think that Luis Robert Jr. is going to be a little bit too pricey, and Jazz will be just right.
That is one of the few moves that would excite me at this moment about the trade deadline. Yeah, I'm a very different Mariner fan than I was even 2 weeks ago when we last spoke, everybody.
Oh, man.
But we'll focus on that in just a few moments. Absolutely no doubt. We do have our last pre-trade deadline anti-rankings to break down for you all. Each team has had about 8 to 10 games since our last chat. We saw their final series, guys, before the All-Star break, the All-Star break itself, of course, and then 2 series to follow for each team. So right now, 1 game is left and still wrapping up. It's San Francisco and Los Angeles. We know the Dodgers certainly had a good week, whether they win or lose that game, and they are in a position to win it. San Francisco, not so much. They're a little bit hazier, but we know that we're not as impressed by the Giants as we've been in the past, spoiler alert, but that's the only game still going on, guys, and I think we've laid the groundwork. Dan, let's take a look around. Things are a little different. This is a beautiful presentation you've put together, and I love that you're in Mets colors. I think
thanks, man.
Yeah, it's appropriate. You guys had the better week. We know we're going to start with you, even though we already know who our 30th team this week will be. Our second black hole team, ironically, the same team as last time. Boo. So we're going to jump into today's coverage here in just a second. Before we do, expect our next 10-game clip to be allowing us to record on a Sunday here. I'm projecting that to be, guys, let's see, the 11th, perhaps? Sounds like the right time for you to expect to hear from us again, the 11th of August. And hope you don't mind the readjusted schedule for releases. We will keep doing this until it catches fire and you guys get mad at us for not being consistent.
Is that the 4th, Warren? Sorry.
No, I agree. Yeah, I wanted you to help me pick the day. 4th sounds great.
Let's say 4th.
Okay, 4th it is. That's a general 10 days away, guys. So the 4th of August, we'll see you then for our next recording. Big thanks to Maya out there who continues to refine her shares of what we're doing and starting to get our word out there. And you guys can help. Please like, please share, please subscribe, please comment. If you take the time to do 2 of 4 of those things, you're doing us such an incredible help, and we appreciate it because we love chatting with you about baseball. And now, as we approach the 5-minute mark to this video, which is so convenient, I can see it now. How cool.
Yeah.
Dan, I suppose we should jump right into our anti-rankings. You guys know how this works, okay? We talk about the 30 teams in baseball from the worst to first, all right? And we draft them back and forth to determine whether we're on the same page or not. And sometimes we are. Sometimes we have some hilariously differing perspectives. Dan, we can't differ on this perspective. We have to choose the 30th team as the Chicago White Sox. But as the Mets, being in better position than the Mariners this week, you'll get to pick number 29, and we'll get going from there. So, Dan, let's talk about how bad these White Sox are, guys. They did again, whether we like it or not, have a winless week. And even though you're supposed to be hearing Dan's melodious voice breaking this down, I can't help but at least get the ball rolling. Talk to us about Chicago, what happened to them, who whooped their butts this week, Dan, and how we feel about how far into the basement they are.
Yeah, a black hole week for Chicago at 0-10 is, oh man, didn't expect to see it again, especially before the trade deadline, before the sell-off has even begun.
Right.
But yeah, Warren, this team has swept 3 times in these past few series. Before the All-Star break, they were swept by the Pirates. They were swept by the Royals after the All-Star break.
Boo.
And then they lost 4 out of 4 to the Texas Rangers. So certainly not bad teams, but to not walk away with even one win. Well, Warren, it's kind of apropos that we're starting with Chicago because Chicago seems to be the thing holding back the trade market right now. And all of these losses are not making their players look very much better in any regard. And there's a lot of players to talk about with Chicago, but I'm just going to focus on one for a second, and that's Garrett Crochet. And there's a lot of talk, Warren, that conversations on his price being as high as it is scaring people off. But also, he's approaching an innings limit over 100 innings at this point in the season. He's never reached in his career before. There's a lot of doubt that he would be able to go deep into the postseason, and a lot of the teams bidding on him are teams that are expecting to go deep into the postseason. So it's actually looking like Garrett Crochet might not be moved at the deadline. Chicago might try and move him in the offseason where a team can get a full year out of him, plus another year of control. So he might not actually be going, and that's just adding to everything being held back by the White Sox. I don't know, Warren, what do you think is going to break it? Is it going to be the Sox making the first move?
Well, it's as one of the biggest lovable losers and not so lovable, depending on who you ask, in the league, you have to expect a couple of these vets to be moved, especially a Tommy Pham is one of the most obvious choices that we've brought up over and over again. Maybe instead of a Crochet, it's an Eric Fetty who gets moved, who's still a strong piece that teams like Baltimore, I was surprised you didn't mention Baltimore in the race for Flaherty, by the way. I do think Baltimore is going to be looking to pick up some starters, so maybe Fetty can find his way over there if they choose to. Luis Robert Jr., that high, marquee slugger for them. He could be moving to a pretty important contender if they are willing to pony up, though. The prices are going to be high for him. And then I've been hinting that I think Eloy Jimenez could also be on the move, but who's looking strictly for a designated hitter outside of Seattle? That is plenty of teams. So maybe that could be another name. So do I think they're the first team to move? Probably not. I mean, I feel like the Marlins are more comfortable with the fact that they're in the basement than even Chicago. I wonder if you'll point out some critical thinking about those Marlins in a couple of, team discussions that will kind of debunk my idea. But yeah, I'm not saying they'll necessarily be first, but I'm thinking about those other names swirling around Chicago who aren't Crochet. If he doesn't end up moving, and then they should just shut him down. They should just shut him down, is how I feel. Well, guys, that's where Chicago rests, but Dan still gets to actually pick a team. Now, his choice for the next worst team in the MLB at number 29, I have some ideas of where he may go. I know where I'm going once he's done. Go ahead, Dan. Who's number 29?
I'm going to kick this one right back to you, my friend, because unfortunately at number 29, it's going to have to be the Seattle Mariners.
Yes.
I'm sorry to say it.
No, man. I was going to take my Mariners as the first pick. Go ahead. You have the floor to tell us why we're both just as disappointed in my Mariners as I'm sure a lot of the fan base is.
Well, I'll take you through it real quick, dude. They had a 2-8 in their last 10. a 4-game series against the Angels before the All-Star break. They only took 1 out of those 4. And then out of the All-Star break, only 1 out of 3 against Houston, which is a divisional matchup. We talked a lot about how important that matchup was. That was a loss. And then a sweep at the hands of the Angels. Didn't see that coming. And that totally flipped things around, knocked them out of the divisional lead. I mean, Warren, so much has happened. Ty France got DFA'd. JP and Julio are on the IL. I mean, it feels like there's a lot happening all before the deadline. So much has happened since just a few weeks ago, like you talked about. I just need to. Are you okay? What's going on, man? How are you?
So yeah, you guys may notice I've got my Bray Wyatt baseball jersey on today. The Let Me In, pivoting completely to wrestling. I still have my Mariners hat on, my red one that I love so much. But the reality is it's belaying my internal feelings. I'm very upset. Very bummed about where the Mariners are 2 weeks since our last conversation, when we were already smelling a bit of a downturn. But with the way the Mariners have been playing, they usually stave away enough negativity that I feel okay at the end of a week. And that's just not the case this week, Dan. As soon as you pass me control of this pick, I was going to be picking my Seattle Mariners. We are as disappointing can be this week. We just gave up our first sweep of the year at the hands of, no, not the Houston Astros, but the Angels. The Angels swept us at home. That is the first team to do it this year, and I am not happy about it. So I'd like to call this our rock bottom. I don't know if it will be. I've been doing some heavy thinking over the last week, and depending on how strong the coffee is in my system, I may say, I don't want to make any moves. Honestly, Dan, I may not want to make any moves. Just keep the youth that we have on the way up. I'm certainly disappointed in veterans like Haniger and Polanco, and would hope to find a way to not deal with them as often next year. I don't think Ty France is the problem. I also don't think he's the solution, but somebody needed to go. I just kind of wish it should have. I feel like it could have been Polanco or Haniger, because Ty France went to drive line and worked on his swing all this past summer, and he honestly has hit more dingers. I'm almost certain hit more dingers than Polanco, for example. So I want to make Polanco our problem, but whatever. The thing is that there's so much wrong with the Mariners that I'm tired of sugarcoating the offense. I'm tired of believing in the pitching, because even the pitching's kind of over it. I wonder how Gilbert and Kirby feel. I wonder how our best pitchers feel when they keep going out there and doing such a solid job and yet not being able to have a winning team like this. I know, guys, we're still over 500, but the writing's on the wall for how legitimate we are, and I'm not happy about it. So do we bother getting rid of the 8 top 100 prospects in our farm in order to reshore up some holes? I mean, I think it would take Jazz. I think it would take, I like Jazz being on the team so much. I had another trade piece in mind that I'm excited about. Maybe the idea of a Ryan McMahon kind of type. Like, we need an outfielder, we need an infielder, and we need bullpen help, most assuredly. If we can get all 3 of those things, we may still be able to win enough of our last 60 games to have a push. But Dan, I wouldn't count on it, and I'm not going to pretend like I am right now. What would you do if you were looking at my Mariners? Give it to me straight, Dan. Would you rip the Band-Aid off and make some big moves, or would you actually just stand pat, lick your wounds, and get ready for next year? Because we're not beating. By the way, Dan, the thing is we're not just trying to beat Houston. We're trying to beat a lot better teams than that. Baltimore, Cleveland's faltering a tad, I know, but Baltimore is maybe the scariest in the American League. Boston, let's just say Boston can still punch people in the teeth. I know they're coming off a down week, but they're still a wild card team right this second that nobody expected, and I don't expect it to smell different. And then you look at the National League, and there's plenty of teams over there that are better than us, whether we make moves or not. So what would you do, Dan? And then we'll move on. Sorry.
I think it'd be irresponsible to buy, honestly. And I think if you get something that has term for going into next year, you can, in the offseason, make some more big decisions. We talked about, like, Seattle was one of the teams that made the most moves transactionally in the last offseason. We talked about before the season the possibility of there being some churn, of there being a little bit of uncomfortability at the start of the year, and that takes a long time to settle in for a bunch of new people all at the same time. So maybe it would be a better decision to make in the offseason instead of right now. I hope Seattle doesn't overpay some of the prices that we're hearing for anything.
Yep.
But I do think they make one big move just to kind of maybe light a fire under the team and maybe see what they can do with a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of belief. And that's why I'm hoping it's a guy like Jazz. But if it's not Warren, it's definitely not going to be a sell-off, right? So it would be stand pat if it's not going to be that.
The biggest thing I've heard our buzz about is that we're aggressively pursuing Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which I think we missed the boat. We missed the darn boat because Toronto thinks they want to continue to try to build a team around them. But we'll save the rest of that discussion for another second or two from now, because I agree with you. If we get one piece only, I want it to be Jazz, because he may do enough to reinvent himself to actually re-inspire this team. I still think we need some bullpen help, especially with Gregory Santos hurting his knee as he set up for a pitch the other day. The less you do and injure yourself, the more scared I am for the severity of the injury.
Exactly.
So, I'm sure Santos is not going to be back in full swing, maybe even this season. We're still waiting on news. But, guys, I've given you enough time on my Mariners. Trust me, I am pretty darn disappointed. And if we fall flat out of this playoff race, I only hope we don't sell a ton of our pieces or, try to buy back a season at this point. I hope we are smart and just wait a little longer, but I don't put it past us. I don't take us as the smartest organization 9 times out of 10. I would say I do, but this may be the 1 in 10 they try a little too hard and make some big mistakes. So we'll see how I feel in 2 weeks. I may be upset. Guys, that was a lot of Mariner time. I know that was probably a good 6 minutes on my Mariners. Let's move into the next team. Let's focus on number 28, and that is those Toronto Blue Jays. I'm telling you guys, I'm tired of talking about how little the Blue Jays make an impact in the playoff race at this point, and that's how I feel they are trending here. They did just come off of a pretty brutal loss to those the Tampa Bay Rays, who shut them out 13-0 in today's season finale to drop brutal. 2 of 3 to them. Yeah, 13-0. And you're trying to, you still think you have a team to build around. Let's just stop. Detroit took 2 of 3 from them this week too, and they hobbled into the All-Star break, losing 2 of 3 to Arizona. So no good news coming out of the play of Toronto. The starter for the All-Star game representing them was Vlad Guerrero, and the only thing he really did of effect this past weekend was hand his home run derby chain over to Teoscar Hernandez, the reigning champion, who, you want to make Seattle more of a punchline, just stand by.
We'll spend plenty of time on that, Warren.
Yeah, I bet you we will. My God. This Toronto team is dealing with an injury to Bo Bichette, if I'm not mistaken. That does hobble what's left of their season, and also those people who may have been aggressively trying to trade for him. We already know Seattle's among those teams still thinking they have a chance at Guerrero Jr. The rumor is that Toronto just wants to continue to try to build around these guys. I think they're insane. I do think at this point, this is one of the most insane franchises in the American League playoff race, year in and year out. I think they just keep slamming their head into the wall. How do you feel about Toronto? I hope it's as negative as I feel.
I'm getting really discouraged, Warren, that rumors are that Vladdy and Bichette, if they're not moved, Toronto's going to double down on next year, which is so insane to think about, that they're not going to, they're probably going to sell rentals. So I think we're going to see guys like Kikuchi and Garcia go, and they'll get as much immediate help as they can in return, as much as less so prospects. So it'll be those kind of moves. And then, I think they're really going to go all in on next year, Warren. I could see them taking offers in the off season. But at that point, everybody will not be wanting to trade for Bichette or Vladdy. They'll just wait until he's a free agent, because that's probably what's, the way it's going to go. So not good vibes for Toronto at all. Very disappointing. I think we'll see him a little bit active in the trade market. But, man, I think we talked a lot about, not expecting them, at least I didn't expect them to be dead last in the division where they are now, and where I think they're going to stay.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Strange organization in need of widespread changes and choosing not to do them. I mean, if I were Vlad or Bichette or any of the other guys who know how to play baseball on that team, I'd question why they want to be there themselves, to be honest with you. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Dan, a perfect segue into number 27, if you don't mind. Take it and run with it.
Oh man, 27. So we had a lot of teams pretty mid this week, Warren. I'm sure you noticed, and then several teams just be really, really bad. And one of them, you're not going to be surprised. I have to jump all over. It's the Philadelphia Phillies. Hey, welcome back to
Ooh.
the basement. They have such a lead in the division that it probably is not going to be too close further down the stretch, but you never know. We're keeping it exciting. So the Phillies, they went 3-6 over this past week and a half. They lost a series to the Oakland A's before the All-Star break. They came out of it, and Warren, they had 8 players. They basically had their whole team in the All-Star break. Took the loss in the game, by the way. It was American League won, and just the Phillies lost.
Really? Yeah. The
They didn't
Phillies
get a
and
lot of.
Dodgers. The Phillies and Dodgers,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely. So honestly, not a lot of rest for these guys. So they came out pretty flat. They lost their 2 games to the Pirates before winning the last one, still losing the series. And then in a 3-game series against Minnesota, they only could take 1 win. So not a single series win in the past 2 weeks for these Phillies. And we also think that they're kind of in the middle of a lot of these trade talks, probably Warren, because who really knows? It's going to be either Philly or Atlanta making the first move and the other team going for the second guy, an outfielder, and then a starting pitcher. And yeah, Warren, is good and healthy as the starting rotation is, they are looking at another starting pitcher just for insurance for Taijuan Walker, so they don't have to pull from the bullpen. Like, they're thinking ahead all the way down. So any bat they get is just going to be insurance. It's probably not going to be a starter, but that doesn't mean they won't go and pay the price for a guy like Brent Rooker.
Mm-hmm. Yo, absolutely. To add as many pieces as they can to make this look even sharper is really where Philadelphia should be thinking. And kudos to them, man. I think we can earmark this as the cleverest and most well put together organization in baseball right now. So even though they may have had some rough weeks, you have to imagine they're going to lick their wounds, retool, and be reinvigorated here in just a few short days. So yes, guys like Taylor Ward and guys like Brent Rooker and guys like Tommy Pham, they are circled by a Philadelphia team who wants to add just a couple more impact bats in that outfield and a starting rotation pitcher. Hey, man, talk about a team who could swing on a Crochet if he's still available, or a Fetty, or Flaherty, or I don't think Detroit would part with Skubal, but there's another one of their pieces right on the mound. I'm trying to remember. Detroit's got one more kind of rental pitcher on their mound, but anyway, somewhere out there, I think like a Michael Lorenzen could be available. I think he's pitching for Texas. Nah, they need all the arms they can get. Never mind. Point is that it's making perfect sense. I think Philadelphia is the best team in baseball organizationally. They are the best set up to have the strongest remainder of their 60 games. And I would expect them to make just enough changes to really underline that and embolden it. Dan, when I said moments ago that I don't even want to see Seattle retooled to prepare to face the better teams in baseball, Philadelphia is pretty much the cornerstone of that perception for me. So I don't think we could beat Philadelphia in 7 games. Why sell the farm to try is how I think a lot of the league might need to look at this team right now, even though they did have and are having a couple of rough weeks. It's just not enough for me to be scared for them yet. And I know you agree. So that's why you were threatened and you put them so low into the count. Like you said, jump on your divisional rival when you can, and I respect it.
Might not be another chance.
Amen. Oh, by the way, the San Francisco and LA Dodgers game is official, and as we expected, the Dodgers did finish off a 3-1 series victory and look a lot better than the Giants. We'll be talking about the Giants sooner than the Dodgers this week, but first, I think I'm going to target the number 1 week from our last show. Yes, the Boston Red Sox are going to be number 26 because of the play that they have put up over the last 10 games, 9 to be fair. They went 3-6. First, they get 2 of 3 from the Kansas City Royals going into the All-Star break, where, yes, man, you have to think that it was one Jarren Duran who left the strongest impression out of the All-Star game itself, hitting the go-ahead 2-run bomb that would eventually... So cool. You got to be happy for a young buck like Jarren Duran, who's been so pivotal to this surprising Boston Red Sox performance thus far this year. to be their hero in the All-Star game just warms your heart. Yeah, not Rafael Devers, who was unavailable for the game after all, despite being named an All-Star. And actually, Tanner Houck, the other player from Boston who got to play in the game, wasn't very helpful to the American League cause. He instead gave up Otani's 3-run bomb that for a while gave the NL the lead. But hey, guys, Jarren Duran looks great. They didn't look great against the Dodgers coming out of the All-Star break, though. They did get swept by the Dodgers. So that's an interesting litmus test for where they stand, and why I get to especially put them so low here is that if you're trying to chase one of the best teams in Major League Baseball like those Dodgers, you need to get at least one game out of them, and they didn't. Colorado also, believe it or not, took 2 of 3 from Boston, which really solidified that they're just reeling a little bit after that sucker punch from LA. Can they rebound? How hard will they rebound? Dan, you kept hinting earlier in our season that you didn't have a ton of faith in these Boston Red Sox. Do you have more faith now? And how do you feel about where they sit right now? At 54-47, they're still a playoff team.
Totally a playoff team. And if they decide to be a buyer, which it sounds like they might do, they can do more than just be a playoff team, right? And totally prove me wrong that if they actually have some of those injuries from earlier in the year come back healthy in the second half, plus any additions that they could make, I mean, it could really go a long way for them. And, you know, especially with the Yankees struggling like they have, Boston kind of just step right over them and be like, hey, we'll challenge Baltimore. Why not? Right. There's enough veteran talent on this team. They still have all-star closer Kenley Jansen at the back of the bullpen. Like, they can shut down games if they need to. I still see them going for a bat. Honestly, Jazz Chisholm seems like the best fit if Seattle doesn't get it done. I know.
Warren, stay away from my Jazz.
If Seattle can swoop in and really get him, I know Bichette was on the table, but since he's probably not being traded, then Boston might go for one of those other like Tommy Pham types, whatever is left over after the big team's feast, I suppose. I could see them doing that. And, you know, also worth noting that manager Alex Cora re-signed for, I think, a 3-year extension with the Red Sox, which is huge, rewarding him doing really well with like almost a Craig Counsell-like situation, Warren, a team that probably on paper doesn't look nearly as good as their record does now and what we've been seeing on the field. He gets the best out of his players. Really didn't expect him to do that. I know he popped up with Boston after the whole Houston debacle. Kind of figured if things went well, he would jump ship to a bigger team, but he's staying put. And that might be really bad for some of the division rivals that are seeing continuity in Boston. It was not supposed to be this good for them this year. And I think they're chasing down the division, Warren.
And if you can feel like it's possible, then play your heart out. You're playing with house cards in many people's minds because no one had these guys on the radar, and we all owe the front office of the Boston Red Sox an apology for not realizing that they kind of knew what they were dealing with, what they were playing with, and that they could have a puncher's chance against a majority of teams in a series. Now, of course, the hot and cold aspect right at the moment has us a little concerned that they need to bounce back quickly. Just for fun, let's slate their upcoming matchups before, Dan, I'll turn it over to you to tell us our next team. Let's see how Boston rebounds as they get ready for 3 against New York, who are reeling even harder, then 3 against Seattle, who are reeling even harder, and then 3 against Texas, who are starting to rebound themselves, getting some of the health back that we knew was going to be important to them at this stage of the season. So that is maybe their next big marquee matchup, and they have to take care of business against their next 2 teams in the meantime. So it's certainly possible for them to lick their wounds and get rebolstered. And with just 5 days away, maybe they'll have some new veteran pieces to play with in that effort. So very exciting stuff for Boston, playing with house cards most certainly. But had a rough week regardless. And Dan, please, who else had a rough week? Take us into a numero 25.
So another team that had a rough week. I'm going to do it again, Warren. Stick around in the division. It's the Atlanta Braves.
Wow.
They also only managed 3 wins over this period. Before the All-Star break, they had 2 out of 3 against the Padres. Coming out of it, again, a lot of players in the All-Star break, not as many as some of the other teams we talked about, but
right.
A series against the Cardinals, they lost that series. They actually had 1 game postponed, so it should have been a 4-game series. And then couple more postponements, a lot of rain in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
A 4-game series against Cincinnati turned into 2, and they lost both of those games. So skidding very much recently. Their overall trajectory, we've talked about the last few episodes, they've been towards the bottom here for a while. Injuries are still plaguing them. Ozzy Albies has a fracture in his hand. Max Fried has a sore forearm. And, some of the other additions that they've made, like Rosario has been great, but they picked up the released Whit Merrifield.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of like Ramon Laureano, he's getting a little bit of opportunity, but hasn't really kicked on yet. Nobody else has kicked it into gear at an Ozuna level, and we still can put this team down as a buyer. But now, Warren, it's looking like the division title might be realistically out of reach. So wild card is the thing that they're focusing on, and I could still see them going for a power outfielder, but Atlanta's really shaky ground here, Warren. Like a skid down the stretch here, they could lose ground to the Mets, and the wild card race is so tight. They could fall out of the race completely.
Ooh, well, I mean, that is both factual, but also, we've been kind of talking about this as a good portion of the season has progressed. The team is not as tough as we thought they'd be, period. There are a couple younger pieces who are showing their flashes of contributions. I won't mention all of them yet again, but the thing is that with the talent they have, they can and can be expected to make this a race all the way to the end. However, they can be a team that may bank too much on bringing in those outside veterans that they feel will only stiffen their chance to be National League pennant winners. And that strategy is not working for everybody. You've noticed this, right? The veterans aren't necessarily the players that are carrying the year. I think Baltimore in their youth is a great example. I think Boston in their youth is a great example. And you look at the National League, Philadelphia is a great combo between veterans with great experience and young guys who are helping to raise the floor, so to speak, of that team. And Los Angeles, even the Dodgers lose with their huge collection of household names, right? So it's not like the one strategy that teams should be looking to do. And Atlanta's very much executing the buy all veterans we can strategy because they think it'll work. And it did in 2021 when the last time Ronald Acuna couldn't play down the stretch for them in the World Series. I think they're sniffing old formulas. I think they're going to employ them. I think we're going to see some more veterans get added to this Atlanta team. They're going to pray everybody stays healthy enough. I think they're going to scrape their way into the playoff dance, Dan. I think it's a little generous to imagine they fall out completely. But I do see them at this stage being a bit of a first-round exit candidate, and that is not what Atlanta fans want to hear after everything they've put into this year beforehand. So another team that has been trending upward theoretically, but had a rough week, and I'll put them at number 24 to carry us forward, guys, is the Minnesota Twins. Yes, the Twins have been a platinum winner for us, losing 0 games in one of their weeks earlier in the season. But this week, I know, right? So many seasons have passed within this season, it feels like. Minnesota's 3-5 this week, though, only mustering their 3 wins. They did drop 2 of 3 to the San Francisco Giants going into the All-Star break. That was in San Francisco. In the All-Star game themselves, we saw Willie Castro and Carlos Correa get named. Correa didn't even play, and Castro, his lone at bat amounted to nothing. Seems to be a trend, by the way, forcing all these players into the lineup. So coming out of the All-Star break, no real momentum to be excited about. They did then lose 2 of their 2 opportunities to the Milwaukee Brewers. And the Brewers are just another one of those exciting and surprising teams we'll talk about later in the show. As always. Philadelphia then, by the way, was their next team, but I will say there was a happy surprise in that Minnesota took 2 of 3 from Philadelphia. So there's still plenty to be excited about from the potential of what Minnesota can do. Their pitching is better than people think, right? Because they're not even on the bubble for many people's thoughts as like the best pitching staff, but they're solid. And the offense, they get contributions from all over the lineup. So while they did have a down week at this 3-5, it's more because of the lack of opportunities, I would say, than anything. They're still 56-45 and solidly in the playoff race. They have a plus 44 run differential, at least according to my understanding. How do you feel about the Twins? Are you surprised to see them this low this week? And, what's their trajectory in your mind, Dan?
Yeah, can't count them out. Trajectory's still upward. It looks like they're going to be buyers. And, if they can commit to more starting pitching, I think the bats have not really been a problem despite all the injuries overall. So that would be their best bet to try and lock down the division, especially because Paddock just got hurt and he might not come back healthy this year for them, depending on how he recovers. But it is looking pretty much like they're going to have to go get somebody. If I had to put my money on somebody, I'd actually say Eovaldi. Warren, I think that's a good fit for this team. He slots in, not an ace. They don't need that, but an easy like second or third starter. Definitely going to close out a series for you, hopefully at some point. Twins won a playoff series last year. They think they can do it again. So I expect them to be buyers and moving things around.
Biggest thing I'm happy to see is that Royce Lewis appears to, keep his legs under him right now, and Byron Buxton, two of my favorite Twins, are staying healthy and contributing, and that will only bode well. If they can stay healthy, this team is still capable of knocking out a lot of teams that are maybe overlooking them. Can they secure the spot in the playoff dance? They're definitely one of those teams that have the best arguments out there right now, despite, again, a rough week and a low placement in this week's standings. Dan, your turn. Who's our next team to fall under fire?
Yeah, so we're moving along pretty well. It's still kind of subpar records overall. I think that's going to give us a subpar team, Warren. How about the San Francisco Giants?
Boo. Boo to the Giants. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. 4-5 week for these Giants. So, or a couple of weeks, I suppose we should say. They actually won a series against Minnesota. It took 2 out of 3 before the All-Star break. And coming out of it, a series against Colorado, they lost 2 out of 3. We'll get to that, Warren. Something happened in Colorado this week. You mentioned it a little bit already. But a series loss there, and then another series loss to the Dodgers. So they only took 1 out of 4 against the Dodgers. In fact, dropping them even further back in the wild card race. At this point, it seems like the Giants might be sellers more than anything else. We kind of know about the reputation of the general manager, Warren. We understand that he's not going to invest in this team right now. If anything, he's going to jettison some guys to make more moves to build whatever team he wants to build next year. So kind of sad for the Giants. Not looking better. Things are getting worse. Logan Webb is still good, though. And then he's going to stay a Giant, but still a reason to watch, I suppose.
Yes, sir. There's a couple Giants that are a reason to watch. I'd like to give a little love to Matt Chapman, who finds himself with 14 home runs. And honestly, Dan, we joked several times over the recordings this season that no 30 home run hitting slugger was going to come out of this team. And maybe Matt Chapman just might do it if he really let him ratchet up the pace a little bit on these swings. He seems to be finding himself a little bit. He's better. He's giving more than San Francisco deserves, if you ask me, as an organization. Is there a chance Matt Chapman gets moved, as a matter of fact?
Oh man, well there goes their home run hitter. I mean,
I know,
if he does, I believe in Ramos. If anybody, he's been so hot he could actually get to it. I feel like Chapman would get to 29 and then hurt his hip or something. I don't think anyone's going to pay for Chapman. But I'm sure they would offer him up because I think they're just going to take whatever's on the table right now. The Giants.
A third baseman. Can they bolster any of those specific contenders? I'm sure if we sat for a second and thought about it, certainly like
Dodgers, but they'll never trade him there.
Or Baltimore, veteran status.
Sure.
So it would be interesting to see, but that's just where my head's at. Yes, kudos to Heliot Ramos for being one of the most exciting young pieces on this team. Hoping for other ones like Marco Luciano to figure it out in AAA and come back and be contribute to this lineup in future years. A young stalwart there, and of course, guys coming back from injury like that exciting Korean star that didn't end up getting to play much of the season, Jaewon Bae, I think.
Hyun-Hoo Lee.
Yunhoo Lee. Thank you, guys. I was just throwing together syllables because unfortunately I'm not the best at remembering those international names yet, but it would be fun to see Yunhoo Lee back next year healthy. They've got things for the future. I just don't care because I don't like this team very much or as an organization. I just love their ballpark. Okay. I knew you guys would love to hear that again. I know I've said that several times, but I'm not a huge lover of these Giants. Let's move on to my next team, the 22nd team in our league, and another one that's been bouncing up and down the rankings quite a lot this season. And this time it's the Chicago Cubs that will take spot number 22. 4-6 was their weekly record, ladies and gentlemen. They went 2-2 against the St. Louis Cardinals as they approached the All-Star break, which is actually kind of encouraging with how good those Cardinals have been recently. Shota Imanaga did push his way into the All-Star game lineup. He did actually get to pitch too, which is more than I could say for my pitchers out in Seattle. Of course, Munoz and Gilbert didn't get to play, but of course Shota did. He struck out one in his solo inning of work. Good for you, Shota. Keep it up. Arizona, though, welcomed them out of the All-Star break and then took 2 of 3 from them in the process, and then another 2 of 3 game loss, series loss, that is, to the Milwaukee Brewers, the divisional rival, the leaders of the division, is a friendly reminder that Chicago still got plenty of work to do. Do they have a chance to even do the work and get back into the race? They're only 49-55, so they can get back to 500 with a couple of solid weeks. But with teams like the Royals, the slightly stiffer Reds, and the much more exciting Cardinals in a 4-game set coming up this week, I just can't feel like Chicago is that stable. How do you feel about the Cubs, dude? Is there any hope that they catch fire again before the season is out? Who might they move? Who might they wish for? How do you feel about the Cubs?
I think if they catch fire, a couple wins could put them from 5th to 3rd in their division pretty easily, but it's probably too much of a mixed bag in the wild card race. It's hard to say the Cubs are completely out of it because it feels like they're that close and Bellinger might be coming back. And we've seen this team get hot before. But overall, the inconsistency is telling me even if they did make the postseason, Warren, they would be gone in the first round. And Bellinger's stock is falling. There's a couple pieces on the team that are actually talking about possibly being sold right now. If they're going to buy, it's going to be with term. But like James Taillon might actually get moved. I mean, that's a name that you probably didn't expect. I'm sure he was expecting to re-sign with the Cubs, but they need to get some sort of value out of this year to go in next year. They have a lot of players under contract and young players that will get better, like Pete Crow Armstrong, like Michael Busch, like all these younger guys. So there's something to build on there. They don't want to sell too much necessarily, but definitely look for some of those expiring contracts to go for the Cubs.
Yes, I think you're precisely right. It seems like if they do put it all together enough to get to the playoffs, they would be an early exiter. And well, it would take some extreme adjustments and some commitment to the game plan in order for that to stick, or not come to pass, I guess I should say. They get ready again to face the Cardinals after a couple more series in a 4-game set, and they want to try to, do better than a split in order to gain some ground. We'll just have to see what they look like in 5 more days. It's likely that they'll be a little lighter instead of heavier. I think we agree. Dano, perfect segue into the next one. Keep it going.
Yeah, let's stay local in the division. Right around the 21 spot, we're going to put the Cincinnati Reds, Warren.
Ooh, good idea.
Inconsistency is the tail of the team. It's what we've seen all year. They continue to start to get healthier as the year goes on, which is encouraging. They won a 3-game set against Miami before the All-Star break. They had a couple of All-Star representatives, Ellie De La Cruz, Hunter Green. So very exciting to see some of those guys. To see De La Cruz come in and get a hit too was great. I don't think he got a bag though, did he, Warren?
He didn't get a bag. I don't believe so. But Hunter Green wasn't exactly the Cincinnati Red that was going to seal the deal for these National League players, huh? As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it's his fault. The American League stomped on their throat when it was all said and done.
Yeah, I kind of coughed it up at the big moment there. And I guess that was demoralizing because they came out of the break and they got swept by the Washington Nationals.
Exactly.
Of all teams. We know we've talked about they've surprised a lot of teams, knock you in the teeth and you don't see them coming.
Right.
But continuing their road trip, they went to Atlanta, had the third game postponed, and won the first two. That's a sweep, Warren. Put it in the books. That's sweet. They swept Atlanta. Count
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, it counts. You're totally right. They'll make up the game on September 9th, so not a factor for a couple of months. And, it's encouraging to see Cincinnati, again, kind of winning the games they need to win, generally, with the exception of that strange sweep at the hands of the Nationals, who do seem to be waving the white flag for the long-term portion of the season. So that was a little confusing. But the Cincinnati Reds, if they can just tighten it up a little bit more, they do seem like a team that can flush their way or push their way into a postseason run a little sooner than expected. There is, however, a little bit of buzz around guys like Montes maybe getting moved. They may not try to make that push after all. They may let themselves stay out of the hard hunt for one more year, which is kind of what we expected from them entering the season, right? Even though they were young and exciting, we thought they were maybe one more year away. And if they're embracing that, they don't really need to sell much to set themselves up for success moving forward.
Like sell a rental, maybe let a Montes go for a good price and buy anything with term that'll help you next year. I'm fine with all that. And if the prices are too much, because it looks like they will be, if they don't do much else, I think that's fine. I think they can make a couple moves in the offseason and go into next year already way better. And it's just going to be about building the consistency, which we want to see from them the second half.
Yes, exactly. Consistency is the name of the game in baseball, in my humble opinion. That's the key word that means you're going to be a contender. Consistency leads to contendership. That sounded pretty. I want that on a t-shirt. But anyway, I do feel as if this team is still on the upswing, figuring out how strong they can be in the next couple of years. Ellie De La Cruz is one of the most popular players in the league. Everybody's got eyes somewhere on Cincinnati. And, Spencer Steer is developing into that fantastic Scottie Pippen comparison we keep doling out. So this is a team on the rise. They don't need to pressure themselves right now. Let's see if that's how they continue to strategize as the trade deadline looms in 5 more days. They could do it, but they can choose to do it. And that's a great place to be for Cincinnati, really, because they may not be ready to take on the toughest teams this year, and they know that. I think they're just playing with some house cards, and they know they're going to be okay. Now, will this team be okay is the question I have. They are guarding the second string of 10 teams in our list at number 20. Guard is the key word there. They are the Cleveland Guardians. Yeah, I know, a little low for one of the teams that I have pretty much said will be an American League playoff team. But the truth is, we keep looking at this squad, Dan, and thinking, will the pitching take them out of it? Will the pitching take them out of it? Now, we're not talking about the bullpen. We know the bullpen is amazing. Emmanuel Clase is like the final boss of the bullpens around the league, man.
He is.
He's so cool. It's fun to watch Emmanuel Clase exist. But what's happening in Cleveland that's got me concerned is who else can pitch. That's kind of a broad question. And offensively right now, the identity that we were starting to get to know with guys like Kwan setting the table and Ramirez and Fry and a couple of these other players doing the slugging for him, the Josh Nailers, right? All the fire that they have in this lineup. It's kind of on a downswing right now. They've been shut out, if I remember the statistic correctly, like 5 of their last 14 games or something like that, including 2 shutout losses in this Detroit series that was really important for them. Not 2 shutout losses, sorry, just the one. But they did get shut out once by San Diego. They got shut out twice by Tampa Bay. All these teams, by the way, either beat them or split a series with them this week. So they just didn't have any bright spots, did Cleveland, apart from a lot of their players getting to show up on All-Star Weekend. Jose Ramirez did have that showing, of course, in the home run derby, hitting the, I believe he hit the most or was right up there with the most in the first round before bowing out in the second, which is so cool. You gotta love J Ram doing his thing. But yeah, Dan, here's my overall impression before I let you weigh in. This team is going to live or die by the starting pitching and by their offense's ability to stay hot and keep them afloat. Do they still have as much of a chance to win the AL Central as I thought they did at the beginning of the season? Or do you think you're waiting for Minnesota or Kansas City to swallow them whole? What's your thought?
Things being the way they are may be pretty close, and the deadline will obviously tell us a lot more who will be able to chase it down towards the end. But I think it's safe to put your money on Cleveland, Warren, because I think they're going to buy. I think that you're right. They only kind of have one major issue in probably the consistency of the offense. And we've seen them break out. We've seen them, have those off games, those shutouts, like you're saying. So if they can bring in like a Brent Rooker type, like a Randy, if they can pay the price for it, and then just get depth, get a depth bullpen guy, a depth infielder, just depth at the other positions to really get yourself ready for a run. And then you're talking about a lineup now we're here. It looks a lot more like the Phillies or the Dodgers almost, right? Like 1 through 6 is a problem. So I think that's what Cleveland does. And if they can accomplish that, I'm confident that they can close out the division. If they can't get their guy, though, then absolutely Minnesota or one of those other teams, Kansas City, whoever does, because I think Kansas City's in on one of those DH power bats too.
Oh, sure.
I could see it be a race down to the wire. So this is going to be an important deadline for Cleveland.
Oh, and this division keeps getting interesting, more and more interesting. Detroit's still in the conversation, whether we like it or not. They had another good week. We'll talk about them soon. But yeah, 4 of the 5 teams look good in this division, or good enough to make a run when it counts. Cleveland needs to not rest on their laurels. Let's see who they look like in 5 days. It could tell us a lot. They're still generally a lock, right? But
yeah,
somebody may show up and try to pry it for them. It really could happen. Dano, take us into number 19 and a new set of 10 in our countdown today.
Yeah, and as we move into the next section, I think we're going to talk about a different type of team. We're going to talk about a buyer, not a seller, Warren.
Ooh.
Let's talk about the Baltimore Orioles.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
He just loves getting the best teams in baseball thrown under the basement. Oh my God.
Listen, man, this is why we're all about these are, I was thinking about the name, Warren. It's not really anti-rankings. They're more like vibes rankings,
Ooh.
On a weekly basis. We're kind of ranking the vibes. And the vibes in Baltimore are not bad, but 4 and 5 in their last 9 is not ideal. They lost a series to the Yankees before the All-Star break. They had a bunch of players in the All-Star game, right? Adley Rutschman was a starter, Gunnar Henderson, Jordan Westberg, Anthony Santander, and obviously Corbin Burns. So we saw Burns had one inning pitched in the game, Warren, I believe. And what else happened? We had Gunnar Henderson make an appearance.
And
home run derby. I was setting you up there, but Gunnar Henderson in the home run derby was
my bad.
Okay.
Yeah. No, he played well. He only hit 11 home runs, though. The low score of the derby, which, you maybe would have expected Adolis Garcia to struggle more. I bet Cal Raleigh would have done better if he'd been in the home run derby. But yeah, sorry. Setting me up. Henderson couldn't get past the first round. Whoopsies. Tell us more.
Yeah, man. Well, they came out of that and they had a big series against Texas and they won. They took 2 out of 3, kind of an offensive outburst in those first 2 games. So, you're always worried coming out of the break. Is the hot team's going to stay hot? They very much seem like they would, but then they dropped a series to Miami. Warren, they lost 2 out of 3 and kind of fell flat in both of those games. Still obviously in a position where they're ahead of the Yankees, but ever so justly now, and definitely a buyer as we go into the deadline. The question is, are they going to be willing to move the prospects? And when we get to these top teams, and Baltimore is one of them, Warren, that we're talking about LA, we're talking about the Yankees, the price tags for all these teams are just their high-level prospects or players on their team immediately. Baltimore might be the best positioned team to part with some of those. That also makes me feel like the price is going to be a little bit higher for Baltimore because everybody knows what they have. They know that they have Herkstad and Kauser that are basically not even getting playing time. That could be starters on all these other teams. So the question is, how much is Baltimore going to be willing to move, to part with, to be aggressive? And is it going to work? I mean, they're kind of in on everybody, Warren. I don't even know who. Do you have anybody in mind? Like, what do you think they need to kind of lock this thing down?
Oh, well, I think we've touched on the fact that they could use a third baseman in the past. Correct me if I'm wrong. So the idea of a Ryan McMahon moving over to them, and a veteran piece who knows how to hit, right? Or maybe an Isaac Paredes could be a smart choice, even though Tampa Bay is still competitive, and which is
They
crazy to
are.
say. It's just crazy to say.
They got to just
And
sell.
and then who else? Third baseman's out there. I think we just got done talking about a third baseman that got our focus for a minute and was like, well, he could end up somewhere else. I think I even said Baltimore in that string anyway. So there's names out there. The really only veteran presence is all that they can really need to bolster, but even that's arguable when their youth is already doing so well this year.
True.
I did want to point out a player that doesn't play a lot for this Baltimore team. That's a decent outfielder who could be on the move that nobody's thinking about. His name is Kyle Stowers, Stowers. He's been a prospect for them the last couple of years, and he's just one of those many outfielders that are kind of dipping their toe in major league and then stepping back out of it. It's just the wealth of the talent that this Baltimore team has. I think they sell a couple of those extra pieces like a Kyle Stowers and get a couple more veteran bats that just help to underline their potency and get ready to take on a team like Philadelphia. That's the most exciting idea of a World Series in my mind right now is the Phillies and the Orioles. And that's who they should be chasing as they make these moves. So beating them to a couple of those vet bats may be important. And that's how I think it will shake down for these number 19 Orioles. You weirdo. You just love finding a way to justify them into like
they lost
middle.
more games than they won, dude.
Yeah, okay. Well, so did this team, and I can't wait to just get this one out of the way. I was trying to decide which one of our American League impact players I should pick on, and honestly, I have to pick on this one next. You guys are going to call me salty. Part of me may say it to be true, but I still need to point out that Houston wasn't quite as good as they could have been this week, and that's why I'll put them at number 18.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is quite a drop, but okay.
Dano, stop it. Whether we like it or not, whether you like it or not, they went 4-5. They had a losing record this week. And yeah, 2 of the wins they did get out of those 4 were at Seattle. I get it. Thanks, Dan. However, they did drop 2 to Texas, who are climbing back into their own race. And then they dropped 2 to Oakland. And Oakland's offense has been crazy since the All-Star break, guys. Take a look. It's almost like the Oakland Athletics that were so exciting in the first couple of weeks of the season way back in April are back and hungry and just having one last hurrah before they start selling pieces. But Houston did only go 4-5. Thank you very much. And outside of Alvarez drawing a walk in the All-Star game, Houston was noticeably invisible during the festivities. I just want to say that. So you could call me salty and you're about to. I get it. I could smell where the wind is blowing from you. But 4-5 is statistically one of the worst remaining teams on the board. So I don't mind sliding them here. Go ahead and make me feel bad about it.
No, man. I mean, you're not wrong number wise. I get it. I would only had them a little bit higher than this, and I will say they've kind of stumbled themselves into the lead for sure. The Rangers haven't been formidable. Seattle's going through a rough patch, but if those teams get things figured out, then Houston is still the most injured out of all of that group. They still have the biggest hole in first base, and that's the market that has closed the fastest. You know, if Vladdy's off the market, Alonso's off the market, then like Yandy is kind of your best first baseman, who is good, but probably not everything that the Astros had envisioned. And then the struggles with their starting pitching. So it's not a matter of if there's stuff out there for them to get what they need to continue this push. I don't know that they can pay the prices that they need. So it might just be a lot of the same team we see going forward. And that makes me think this race is not over. You know, this 3-team race all the way to the end. It's not over yet. Warren, you were right for us not to disregard Houston earlier on, but I'm not ready to hand the division over to them. I think that this thing is not over. You guys are still in it.
You're a generous man. I think you're just trying to help me feel better because you know I'm so full of pee and vinegar this week. But the wind is blowing, right? The intangibles have really flipped away from Seattle and towards the Texas teams, Houston included. And even though they had a rough week this week, the paper looks like they will have a chance to continue to surge to we're speaking generally though. I mean, they do have the Dodgers, who are, hit or miss at the moment. We have, I'm just saying, they are hit or miss against a team like Astros right now. Should be a good series. And then Pittsburgh, who I'm excited about, and I think some of the league is too, man. Pittsburgh's still buzzing a little bit right at the moment. And then Tampa Bay, who's still just finding ways to hold 500. So they'll probably be able to do it again against Houston near the end of the string of games that they have coming up. So I just feel like Houston is going to be in a better position as these weeks pass. They're going to pick up a couple pieces that are going to be important to them. Let the prophecy continue to come up, Texas, because it's just my life. Well, we'll see, Dan. I love that you want to give me a little bit of hope, but I think your hashtag says it all, man. Hope is overrated or something like that. Guys, let's keep moving, shall we, away from Houston, and that gives the pick to you, Dan. Make it up to me. Who will you punch at next at number 17?
I'll make it up to you, dude, because this team is so disappointing that they don't deserve to be in the upper half of our rankings. All right.
Okay.
It's the Yankees. It's the Yankees.
Oh my God.
Not surprising.
They're on a couple week trend of negativity for
That's
sure.
Right. That's right. And it's not getting any better. And before the All-Star break, they won a series against Baltimore, which was pretty good. Lost the last game of the series in a close one, and then sent Juan Soto and Aaron Judge to the All-Star game. And yeah, Warren, is kind of strange. Neither of them were in the home run derby. What's up with that? I thought they were two of the best home run hitters in the league, and neither of them? They have something against the Yankees?
Talk about the Yankees being salty. They just want to keep everybody healthy. Like you said last week, that's a good justification, but I feel like they're just holding out on us. How rude to have two of the finest sluggers in the entire league, and that's statistically a fact, and keep them away from us. How dare you?
Yeah, but Soto didn't want that to affect this season that he's having, this great season. He had 2 RBIs in the All-Star game that contributed to that win. Let's not forget he's looking for an extension. He did an interview recently. They asked him how much money he wants. He says it's all about the championships, Warren. It's all about this guy's won one before already, right? So it's going to be pretty indicative the second half of this year. Does he resign? Does he not? Well, the Yankees are not doing a great case of selling it right now because out of the break, 4-game series against the Tampa Bay Rays, they split. And then a 2-game series, the finale of the Subway Series against your New York Mets. Warren, they fell on their face in front of their home crowd in the Bronx. And the Mets get a 4-game sweep against the Yankees for the first time in 11 years.
Congratulations, Dan. I'm going to give you a hug through the computer. That's just good news. Your hair smells great, by the way.
Thanks. It's coconut. I kept on waiting for something to go wrong, and it didn't. But you know what? This Yankees team is 10-20 in their last 30.
Exactly.
And watching them in this series, you still saw the offensive power from Judge and from Soto, but it's clear this team needs a lot of things. Definitely needs a bullpen help. That's been a big issue for them. And they've kind of been in conversations everywhere else. They could use a first baseman. They could use an outfielder. They could use a third baseman. They have a lot of things not working right now. Like Stanton coming back is going to take a DH position. So that's probably the only thing they're not in on as in DH. They'll take a starting pitcher to help support their bullpen more. So they're obviously going to be in these conversations. They're not out of the race clearly, but their momentum has been so poor. It really has to make you start questioning a playoff run for this team. I mean, certainly they're daunting. They're kind of scary. Judge and Soto can take over a game, but when you get to those later levels of the playoffs, I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that they can really hang, Warren. What do you think?
Well, you need to have reliable pitching is the thing I want to say. And while their season started off so well in that area, they've been falling off a little bit since getting Garrett Cole back is the pattern we noticed last week, which is just the surprising, impact I think none of us really expected there to be here. But the thing is they've still held tight at 4th in ERA in that regard, overall as a squad. They've allowed the 5th fewest earned runs. They do the least, or they do among the top 10 in WHIP. So like the numbers there are still strong enough that the pitching may not be the most sus. It's just who else can do the offensive side of it outside of Judge and Soto. And there's been a lot of buzz over Jason Dominguez, in the hobby, as I'm getting myself ingrained in trading cards, guys. More on that in coming weeks, I promise that. But like Jason Dominguez is a really popular name and card to get. Has he even been an impact player? I want to ask you from your perspective for this roster, this
He's
young rookie.
he's gotten playing time because they've been so injured, but impact at the level of the other bats on the team, no. I mean, he's young enough and he's shown sparks, but I would say that Volpe's had more of an impact of any of the young prospects they've had.
They still score the most runs in the league, do these Yankees. They still have the second most home runs. They still have the second most RBIs. They still have the most walks. It's all trending in a positive enough direction that you have to think they're going to bounce back eventually, but mentally, maybe they're unfocused. Maybe they're taking a bit of a mid-season sabbatical intentionally and getting ready to get stiffer as the season end approaches. Sometimes we see teams like, especially in other sports, they coast a little, right, as the playoffs approach. So maybe that's what they could be finding themselves doing. You have to expect this to be a strong enough team to make the playoffs, at least at this moment. But after the trade deadline and everybody's made their changes, it will revisit if they cannot buck this generally lukewarm to negative trend we've been seeing 3 or 4 weeks, or shows, I should say, in a row. 3 against Boston, 3 against Philadelphia, 3 against Toronto. You have to expect them to be able to win maybe half those games. So we'll have to see what they feel like in 10 more games, man. We may be speaking relatively neutrally about them again, like we did this week with a 4-5 record. So that's kind of where I smell them coming out after this next set. We will see if that's true. But Dan, you've heartened me, my friend. You've cut so many of the best teams in baseball statistically into our talk already. I feel like I just need a quick piece of candy in the form of some low-hanging fruit. So why don't we put the Miami Marlins at number 16? Shocker, guys. They had a good week by their standards, if you don't mind me saying. They did go 500, and they raised their home game victory count to 22 in total as of this conversation, which is just exciting for them, right? Hooray, more wins. They got 4 of them at home, 2 against the Mets out of 4 chances, by the way, and 2 against the Orioles out of 3. Now, that one's crazy, especially when you think about that. The Marlins really just came down to a couple swings, and they could have won that game to sweep Baltimore, but it didn't happen. It's okay. The only other result worth talking about is that the Cincinnati Reds took 2 of 3 of them leading into the All-Star break, which you would expect. But at 5-5, 37-66 overall, Miami belongs no more closer to our top 10 than they already have found themselves this week. And you said it yourself, many of these exciting pieces they have left should be on the move, whether you're a Josh Bell, a first baseman, you say? Houston, who else, right? Houston,
Royals.
New York, right? These guys are going to come knocking for Josh Bell pretty quick. Who else? We've got Jake Berger at third base. Oh, hi, Baltimore. We've got Jazz. I hope he goes to Seattle, but because it would help so many different aspects of the way we are thinking right now. But if not, gosh, there's a whole plethora of teams who could benefit from Jazz Chisholm Jr., even if the players do feel he's the most overrated in the league. And that's just rude. How dare you, players? Why is that a stat?
Tanner Scott, Warren.
That was my last one. I'm just expecting him to go to you. So I expected you to be like, pluck mine. Thank you. Scott's the softest tissue on the mound, my friends. Miami is a soft team, is what I'm trying to build up to. And we know that, but they're going to be getting rid of the pieces that could have been here in the next couple of days. And this will be one of the most shelled clubs, I expect, in the next time we talk. And we wouldn't expect them to win too many more games. So this 5-5 week was pretty much their high point for the season. Anything you want to say about the Marlins before we move on?
Just that, one of these moves will probably kick off everything else. So they'll be very active, and I'm excited to talk about them post all these moves and look at what's left, and maybe they'll have a good haul, and they might actually have a good team sooner than we think.
Dan, if we could find the time, we may need a trade deadline recap episode that would randomly pop up for our fans. I'm just throwing that out there. It'd be nice to have it because we'll have a lot to break down the next time we talk.
Maybe we'll see what we're doing on the deadline day, and we can do some reactions to some of the news coming out. I'm sure there'll be a lot of stuff happening on Tuesday. So
yeah, it should be fun. I'll be open-minded to that. But Dan, go ahead and take us into the midpoint of the countdown. Time's a wasting.
Yeah, man, let's keep it with this NL East. Let's move on to the Washington Nationals. Let's go. You're just queuing all these up for me, Warren. How did these teams make it this far again? What are we even doing here?
That's so funny. Yeah, this is one that we've called, they themselves behave like they wave the white flag at this point in the season. So the Nationals showing up here is probably just a side effect of the fact that they had a winning record, all things considered, this week, 5-4. Tell us about it, Dan.
Yeah, before the All-Star break, they had a 3-game set against Milwaukee, took 2 out of 3 in that. They had 2 All-Star representatives in C.J. Abrams and in Kyle Finnegan, and not a lot for either of them to really represent their teams. But they came out of the break and they swept the Cincinnati Reds at home, Warren. We talked about that already. And then they were swept by the San Diego Padres. This one was significant, Warren. These teams had some history from earlier in the year. When Washington was on a road trip, they actually roughed up San Diego quite a bit. So now this was a good opportunity for San Diego to do the same thing to Washington in their house. This is a nice little bookend on that series for those two teams. Kind of nasty, if anything. And yeah, where does that leave us? Washington is far enough out of the wild card where they're not really in that conversation. They have young pieces that they're building around. So I would expect to see some of the older players, some guys with a year term being moved out so they can get more young players in return. They're doubling down. They know they're a couple years away. They're not going to overreact. So that means we'll probably see guys like Jesse Winker, Dylan Florio, and probably Patrick Corbin get moved. And those are all names that are on the secondary market. So like once these big names start going, that's when Washington will start dealing all of these other guys.
Patrick Corbin's going to be one of those guys that gets picked up out of necessity because he's been trending generally downward for a couple of years since having some pretty important surgery. And I just don't see his name trending happily lately. Right. So yeah, grab him at your own risk out there, contenders. Jesse Winker, same thing. I mean, he's been motivated in the Nationals uniform, it would seem, but I wouldn't expect him to carry that over to whoever grabs him. He's very much touch and go, and he's got kind of a sour attitude, but only I as a Mariner would understand that. Dylan Floro, maybe the best piece on that market for this team as we get there. But this is a team that we've talked about with excitement because the future reminds me a little bit of the trajectory of the Cincinnati Reds minus perhaps a key star, right? Maybe they need some star power. CJ Abrams is growing into that kind of player, but it would be cool to see them draft some pieces that surprise us and become, make this team speed up their rebuilding process.
Right.
They're a couple years away from that, but in a good place, right? We talked about last week, and it doesn't really change. They're in a good place in the long term overall, are these Nationals, and they really don't need this year to go much better than it already has. Good for them for being at the 15th spot at this stage of the season, and look for them to get rid of the last veteran pieces to help them look forward to the future. That's what we're expecting, most definitely. Will it be true? We'll find out after these next 5 days. Dan, how about more low-hanging fruit? Can I, please?
There's so much.
I'm so bored of all these hot picks we've been throwing out earlier on. I just want to make sure the Colorado Rockies get recognition next because they also had a good week by their standards, going 5-4, a winning record, Dan, out of Colorado. Yep. How did they do it? I know. How? I'll tell you how now. First, they dropped 2 of 3 to the New York Mets because that's supposed to happen. You're welcome.
Hate that.
They dropped 2 of 3. They dropped 2 of 3.
Should have been a sweep, Warren.
That's okay. Gotcha. Boy, you Metropolitans have
games were
confident.
Too close.
Well, okay. Less close was the potency of Ryan McMahon in the All-Star game. He struck out in his lone at bat. One of about 7 All-Stars to have that, by the way, guys. 1 chance and a strikeout and a goodbye. San Francisco actually gave up 2 of 3 to Colorado in San Francisco, as we mentioned earlier. And then at home against Boston, how about 2 of 3 for the Rockies there? That was a cool outcome for them, especially almost setting a franchise record in runs, my guy, against Boston in game 3 of that series.
Nuts.
They beat the Red Sox 7-20. Wow.
Scored 13 in the first 4 innings.
Talk about Coors Field working its magic on that one. So you got to give a little love and put these guys around the 14th spot. Who's lovable here? I mean, outside of Charlie Blackmon, the greatest beard in baseball history, not a whole lot. You got to think that Ezekiel Tovar and, Brendan Doyle and the other founding father cornerstone pieces of the future for this team are what's worth building around, not the Chris Bryant that's still sitting there gathering mold on this lineup. This is such a strange team, as we've always enjoyed talking about. How do you feel about them at this moment, knowing all too well it doesn't matter how you feel, they are trash?
They are trash, and it's so weird because they played that series against the Mets where it was way too competitive, and the Mets kind of just outslugged the Rockies. Luckily, it was like they were playing in Coors War, and I had to keep checking and be like, no, they're in New York. Why are there so many homers in all of these games? And that's what the Rockies do, right? And they really lived and died off of that in these series against the Giants, and especially against Boston. And man, talk about that last game. I mean, that was a Nick Pivetta start for Boston. That game's part of the reason that Boston might aggressively go after a starting pitcher, because that was so eye-opening to them. And that's what this Rockies team can do. And it's just the pieces, Warren. I don't want to see these pieces go because they are what's contributing to these wins. Rogers, McMahon, they'll get a big haul back, but we have seen the Rockies screw up trading away players and signing new players so badly. This is a whole new organization from the ones that got rid of Arenado, then signed Chris Bryant. But it's still I'm nervous. I don't know about you. I know that they'll sell some of these guys. I know we'll see maybe a Stallings, a Diaz, a Cal Quantrill go, but I'm not really sure if there's going to be a lot of other big names moved. And if they are moved, I think I'll just be disappointed, Warren. The Rockies got to get off this train. Having a run differential this bad in Colorado, it doesn't make sense.
I know we're running out of time on having a nice, comfortable chat, Dan, so I won't stand on this pedestal too long, but take a look at the 2024 draft that the Colorado Rockies had. Depending on who you ask, they actually may have been winners of the draft, which tells us this is an organization that might finally be deciding that they want to have some up years. So, Dan, I wouldn't worry too much. Maybe they do get rid of a couple of the veteran bats that have just a little bit of control on them at this point, but I don't think they're going to wholesale much for any reason whatsoever. I think this is a team that might just try to be good in the next 3 years or so.
That'd be great.
So, yeah, I would love that. I'd love that for the Colorado fan base and organization. Take a look at the draft results. I'm not going to sit here and say I know all the names, but a lot of pundits, a lot of the listeners that I like to listen to, or conversationalists I like to listen to, have shared that Colorado may just be smelling like roses out of that draft. And that's a good turning point towards a bright future in an organization that has not had one in a long time. So we'll see. Number 13, though, unlucky number 13 falls to you.
Yeah, and unlucky, we're going to go ahead and give it to this team that I still don't know how to feel about. Is the St. Louis Cardinals. Because they've been thriving lately, and then they lose series, and I don't know what to think. They split a series against Chicago before the break, and then out of the break, they won 2 out of 3 against Atlanta. And, you see Atlanta and you think, oh, they're a good team. And then you remember, oh, well, then maybe not. And then they lose 2 out of 3 in a 3-game series to the Pirates, Warren, which is a huge divisional game. And as of now, they are solidly in a wild card position. But, well, I should say they're a half game back of a wild card, but they're solidly in the wild card race. So they're definitely going to be buyers. Just a matter of how much they're going to want to spend. Probably need a starting pitcher, some bullpen help, support Lance Lynn, and maybe another bat, because I think they're kind of done with Goldie at this point. They're not going to be reliant on that. Whether it's a first baseman, a DH, some sort of infielder, I could see them being aggressive. I don't know if they're going to go after like a Yandy type. It might be more of a low level type of player, but I think St. Louis is going to be aggressive at the trade deadline, buy a little bit, and keep this Central race really exciting.
Oh, dude, the Central, as we've talked about ad nauseum, is so much fun to watch. There's so much drama, so much upward, downward across all 5 teams in this division. You keep looking at Milwaukee, wondering, are their arms going to give out? And if they do, it opens the door for literally any of these other teams to decide to push through. St. Louis is one of the teams that a couple weeks ago I would have said was maybe the hottest amongst them. I'm going to talk about a different team and argue that a little later in our talk, unless you do it first. But St. Louis has definitely earned my respect. I'm excited for their eyes being locked on the future. Guys like Mason Wynn, of course, Lars Nootbaar, who I love to talk about, and Nolan Gorman are just like the start of the iceberg, right? A couple of these veteran arms are going to fade out over the next couple of years. I'm looking at you, Miles Mikolas. But other than that, this is a team that's reinventing itself and could be in the position to do exactly what you prophesized and retake the NL Central and a playoff spot in the next couple of months. Yeah, I think it's really looking better and better. Who do they need? They need, again, consistency, maybe a first baseman. Is there somebody they can offload Goldschmidt to that might be giving them a better idea? Like maybe a Josh Bell can go to him or them and be in a better position. You never know. So yeah, it could be worse. Jake Berger can play first, by the way. So I like Jake Berger, and I think teams need to grab him from Miami somehow and use him somewhere. But Jake Berger plays first secondarily. He could be fun to add to a St. Louis mix because he's one of those players that helps the team get better as the ball rolls downhill. So just thoughts I'm having, but you got to be excited for where St. Louis is. I know I talked a lot of garbage on them earlier on in the season. It's because I had a lack of belief in some of the arms they brought in to justify your kind of confidence, but it's working enough. Will it be enough to help them actually solidify this spot, or will another team that a lot of folks aren't thinking about surprise them? They haven't been discussed yet, and they will pretty soon. So anyway, St. Louis is a fair shot at this spot, Dan. Good choice, my friend. Good choice. But I'm going to take us into our next pick, and it's one that I'm a little kind of mixed to have to bring up at this point because I like them and I root for them and I want to see them be a playoff team. And I know you do too because you picked them to win the AL Central. How about the Kansas City Royals?
Yes.
Who just, man, they have to be just outside the top 10 this week at 5-4. 56-47 overall. We've been seeing them go from being a team that I felt was locked into a playoff spot in the American League to being just a little bit sus. And let's talk about the path that got them there this week. They dropped 2 of 3 to the Boston Red Sox going into the American League, into the All-Star break. So that's, a great test right there against a team that's trying to prove they're playoff worthy. They swept the Chicago White Sox coming out of the All-Star break, which, of course, let's just pause for a second and give big round of applause to Bobby Witt Jr.
Yes.
Let's pretend like, he's the superstar that we have kind of compared to Julio Rodriguez caliber talent on paper. So I was watching him with a big old, what I'm trying to say is I was really like, my heart was warmed watching Witt Jr. get to the final against Teoscar Hernandez and make it such an entertaining final round. And no Royal really did much to talk about in the All-Star game itself, with the exception of Reagans and Seth Lugo, maybe allowing 3 hits, sure, but no runs. And their 2 innings of work gave birth to some Ks, but that's about it. This Kansas City Royals team and their superstar Bobby Witt Jr. are just so much fun to think about. It's going to be fun to see who they pick up at the trade deadline to kind of shore up their chances of busting back into the playoff bracket for the first time in years. And they're in a good position to do so. Over the course of this next week, they could get even better. They've got 3 against the Cubs, 3 against the White Sox, and 4 against the Tigers. This could be a team that maybe has, Dan, dare I say it, an 8-2 kind of week coming up. Maybe.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the Royals outside the top 10 this week due to a slightly winning record? But are you still as confident in them as a playoff contender as we were weeks ago? I'd expect that's a yes.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely going to stay in the wild card and definitely going to be a competitive playoff team. They've already traded for one reliever. I could see them going for one more late bullpen guy and maybe like a Brent Rooker or, if Arizona ends up selling like a Jock Peterson type, Justin Turner from
Mm.
Toronto, if they want to let him go. Like, I think that would be great for this Royals team. They can give up
Mm.
the DH position, and there's some names out there and other teams that do not have, like Dodgers can't, the Yankees can't. They all have set DHs. So good opportunity for the Royals to get somebody really good. And just want to call out, you mentioned Bobby Witt, like obviously the home run derby in the month of July, Warren, he's hitting 509 batting average. His slash nine, well, he has a 1400 OPS in the
Jeez,
month
jeez,
of July. So
jeez.
he is exploding, dude. And he's
Yeah.
bringing the team with him. So really excited to see the Royals continue to make this tear. I hope that they buy, and I hope they have a deep run.
Absolutely. It's exciting stuff to know Kansas City is fulfilling the little prophecy you laid out for them earlier on in our coverage, discussing how they made enough changes to catch enough teams off guard to push their way into the playoffs, and it's shaping up that way. And if they do get a strong pickup at the trade deadline, I like your Justin Turner call out for sure, but no way Arizona is selling. Sorry. Well, it could happen, man. It could happen that they actually surprise a contender a la the way Minnesota did last year, right? And caught
Right.
one of their opponents off guard. I think it was Toronto. Oh, Toronto, you're so futile. Anyway, Kansas City, all for it. Good stuff to see. You get the final pick before we round the bases into our top 10.
Yeah, and like right before we go into it, this team has seen a lot of trips around this area and further into the top 10, but it's going to be the Milwaukee Brewers here, Warren.
Whoa, that's a heavy hitter to knock out outside the top 10.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Well, the vibes are questionable, dude, because they lost the series going into the All-Star break, took only 1 out of 3 against Washington. They had a couple
Mm-hmm.
starters in William Contreras and Christian Yelich. Yelich didn't do anything in his at-bats, Warren, and then he
Mm-hmm.
came back and was immediately put on the shelf. And
Mm-hmm.
now he might need season-ending back surgery, which his
Yes.
back problems have been what's attributed to his less than MVP caliber years the last few years. We know that player's in there. We've kind of seen it through the first half, and this is just a huge hit to a Milwaukee team. I should
Yes.
finish out of the All-Star break. They won 2 games, swept the Minnesota Twins, big divisional game.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, not divisional, but you know what I mean. Battle of the Centrals, and
Sure.
and then they took 2 out of 3 against Chicago to maintain their position in first place in the NL Central. I do expect them to be buyers, but probably just rentals, like a Flaherty type, like guys like that. I did not expect them to get any bats, but now this Yelich thing, they might be on the table for an outfielder, Warren. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, Dan, you actually did a great job acknowledging the fact as to why we're putting Milwaukee here. It is the Yelich situation. The Yelich situation is not helpful to a team that needs every offensive cannon they can to overcome what we continue to point out is an unstable collection of arms. We haven't seen a single pitching star really underline themselves as the reason and the answer on the mound for Milwaukee. They've just cobbled it all together the best they can and let their offense do the rest. And when you lose a Yelich, who is a huge part of that offense, it is understandable to keep them outside the top 10 and be a little worried for them with teams like Cincinnati, St. Louis. The Cubs can figure it out, but that last team we haven't talked about in the Central is the one I'm buzzing about at the moment. And that's the thing. They need to protect themselves because other teams are coming and they're capable. They need to find that outfielder. You're right. They need, I would say, Brent Rooker. They need, I would say, all those other suspect names I keep mentioning, like the Wards and the Fams guys. They need to come over to this team. They need to get it done. They are in danger of losing this position. It's true without a Yelich. So exciting stuff because Milwaukee's been impressive. They've earned our respect. We've enjoyed rooting for them because of how plucky and how little we projected them to be in this position, and yet they are. Now they need to protect themselves, and it's one of the most interesting storylines going into the last portion of the season. This trade deadline is so important to Milwaukee. Let's see who they turn out to be. This is it. It's so exciting. just
Yeah.
because they've been such a fun surprise, but they are in danger of getting caught. And man, I almost wish that wouldn't happen because they've been such it's been such a cool surprise, but you see it every year. There's usually one great team that did really well for a good portion of the season that suddenly finds themselves in the background. And while Atlanta looks like a team that is a better candidate for that than Milwaukee, this Yelich situation might turn that on its head for sure. Dan, you're making it tough. Okay. The top 10 have arrived. You're making it
Yeah.
tough. I look at the names who are left and I wonder to myself, who can I pluck from this pool that makes the most sense? It is not the easiest group left for me to distinguish who's truly worse or better. Tough, 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 tough. I guess I just need to keep it down towards those teams that haven't been good generally all season. How about the Oakland Athletics earning a top 10 spot this week? Might as well
Wow.
shoot for the last piece of low-hanging fruit that rose higher up the tree than we expected, guys. Yeah. How so? Well, they won like every series this week. They went 6-3. Yeah, guys. Listen to who they beat. We'll start with the easy ones, right? They take two of the, not first, but first out of the All-Star break. They took 2 of 3 from LA. That would be the Angels. Then Houston also lost 2 of 3 to this team. Henceforth, why I got to talk about Houston a while ago. And then it was the team that they faced going into the All-Star break that Oakland took 2 of 3 from. That's got me going, hey, man, give them some love. The Philadelphia Phillies lost 2 of 3 to this team. So, not to mention Mason Miller. Of course, we all know Mason Miller, the flame throwing anomaly and in the back end of Oakland's bullpen. He got the win in the All-Star game, guys. All he had to do was strike out 2 guys and let the offense do the work in the next inning. And Miller is your guy with the W. He's so cool. This Oakland team, by the way, I mentioned it earlier, their offense exploded en route to such a great week. They've just scored a ton of runs, 13 against the Angels in their first game of that series, 11 against Philadelphia in the middle game of that series. And then they scored a total of 13 against Houston, giving up 10, but whatever. Series wins are series wins. Oakland gets to be top 10, Dan. Go ahead and throw it away.
Yeah, if you remember when they were hot earlier this year and then just were cold for the last month and a half and really lost that lead that they had built, like this is that offensive performance, the outburst that we've seen from them.
Yep.
Young team, so it makes sense we don't see it over a longer course of time, but there are pieces there in Oakland that could really stick around and be something. We know Mason Miller isn't going to get moved, but the question is who else is going to be moved? Probably a couple of bullpen arms. We might see Brent Rooker get kicked out. Like I want to see this team kick it together because there's a lot of strong pieces here. We're probably going to see some of these teams gone. So it's a question of how far they're going to drop off after the deadline. I think it might be kind of severe. So I'm glad they're getting these wins in now, Warren, because it might not last.
No, it's true. I mean, if they want to be, we've talked about this, right? The culture's on a reset, a long-term one. Why have all these players all the way up until that point? If they're hot now, give them to the contenders, keep shoring up your pieces. That's probably the Oakland formula until they find themselves in Vegas or in Sacramento or wherever the heck they're going to be long-term. Yeah, it's crazy how so much is still up in the air for this storied and important franchise. Like, let's just put it that way, man. The history of Oakland deserves better. Thank you very much. But I know we can stand on that soapbox plenty, and we don't have to. But kudos. I like how Oakland has been a first quarter and third quarter team, I would say, right? They started out of the gates hot. They're coming out of the All-Star break hot. Kudos to them for being motivated to again impress when they can. And they may run out of steam in the back halves in the second and fourth quarters, so to speak, but they still have my full respect for who they've been this year. Kudos to them. They've not been the White Sox, right? It's really all we should have to say. They've not been the White Sox. Yep. Speaking of enough, Dan, take us into number 9.
Yeah, man, let's jump through these because all these teams had kind of similar records, good, just a little bit better than the rest. It's going to be the Tampa Bay Rays and won a series against Cleveland 2 out of 3 before the All-Star break. Only Isaac Paredes was made into the All-Star game. Didn't really do much. came out of it and split a 4-game series against the Yanks before winning a 3-game series against Toronto. So didn't lose a series all week. At this point, as you mentioned, Tampa Bay's above 500 again. So confusing. Are they buyers? Are they sellers? Are they a wild card team? I think they're pretty clearly not a wild card team at this point, and they should be sellers. And there's a lot of expiring contracts they'll probably move. Even guys like Yandy and Randy, they could get a lot back from those. So they're not necessarily going to go through a full rebuild. Like, they could be pretty good in a short amount of time. So I see Zach Eflin probably moving too, and then moving a few more pieces, and maybe their record suffers a little bit more this year. But I expect them to get some pretty good returns. And they're also one of those teams kind of leading the way on the trade market.
Dano. You're going to be surprised when I say I want to change the name of the mascot for Tampa Bay one more time. I know we've had the Devil Rays over the years, and then the Rays, and they're like the Devil Rays of the Sun and all that other stuff. Dan, I want them to be the Tampa Bay Tortoises because, dude, the slow and steady is winning this race. Whether you like it or not, this is still a bubble playoff team. And when they put up a 13-run outburst like they did against Toronto today, who had Chris Bassett on the mound, one of their more reliable choices to throw, like, guys, stop counting out Tampa. I'm surprised I have to say that right now because I know I've been like deciding forever what I think about them, and I think they still have it in them to make a playoff push if enough of the ones ahead of them start having the wheels fall off. I mean, if a New York and a Seattle are going to bow out, there's room for a Tampa in this conversation still. They just need to look a little stiffer than Minnesota. They need to look a little better than Boston. Like, it's possible. It's possible. And they've got the stars and they've got the offensive potency on paper that they could just sort of slow their way into a playoff role. So one more time, these 50-50 Tampa Bay Rays get my wait and see message. I'm sorry, but this is a team that is not losing games enough to count them out. So the trade deadline is going to be fascinating. If they do dump their players, then we understand they know where they're at. They know that they are not capable of being good enough to beat the best. However, if they do even one little bit of buying, dude, I don't know, man. There might still be something in the clear waters down in Florida to make this team sneak into the postseason. And I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not calling my shot, but I am saying sellers, I am not yet convinced that they are. Crazy. I know, but we're 5 days from the deadline and Tampa's still too darn competitive. Crazy. Really, I got mad respect for them, dude. Talk about professionally flying under the radar as Tampa, but they're still here. They're a top 10 team. So that's crazy. Dano, keep it going. Number 8. I don't want to waste any more time. These teams are too good. They're calling for our attention.
Yeah, dude. So we're getting up to the upper echelon here. We're going to do the Detroit Tigers.
Good idea.
Spot. Yeah. So 6-4 over their last 10. They actually won a series against the Dodgers before going into the All-Star break. They had Tarek Skubal and Riley Green both represent, which are really impressive. Tarek Skubal made a good little show for himself. Probably going to be the big name move, but maybe not. Maybe too pricey. We'll see. After the All-Star break, they won a series against Toronto, took 2 out of 3, split a series against the Guardians. So pretty good results from this Detroit team over the last few weeks. They're right 2 games under 500 at this point, and I think you can't really count them out completely, Warren. They're probably going to be sellers, but if they lose a Skubal or maybe like a Jack Flaherty, there's still a good team there. They're still going to get good pieces back where they can be competitive. Maybe not this year, but next year. I think that's really more of their focus is on next year. So they're not going to go for any rentals. I don't see them doing that, but I can see them buying if it's with term. So they're going to be in those conversations, Detroit.
Yeah, this is a team that would be interested in getting as much future talent as possible while still being potentially in the mind of selling guys like, I know I've said them before, so don't get bored, guys, but like Mark Canha, the veterans who maybe long-term don't fit, or the Gio Urshela, right, comes to mind, but grab young, controllable pieces that will help guys like Riley Green, Colt Keith, Matt Vierling carry this team into the future offensively. Kerry Carpenter, of course, is one of my absolute favorites. Jake Rogers, maybe a Carson Kelly can be moved, veteran catcher in their backup position that, well, you don't let Jake Rogers be your guy, right? Spencer
Right.
Torkelson, he's been not good this year. Kind of a bummer. Maybe you can move him for a better controllable first base piece somewhere out there. Maybe. But
Oh,
that's a,
anyone's paying for him, right?
well, that's true. I don't know how controllable he is, and he's still, I'm
He's got a
thinking,
couple
young enough.
years.
There you go. And I think he's young enough where we don't need to call him incapable of being a star yet at only 24. But
Right.
the truth, yeah. So this is a team that's still theoretically kind of like the Reds, maybe set up for the long term. Um, why bother trying to be something more than that now is my thought. Don't buy too much if you're going to. And I don't see this team doing it because they've been consistently on the outside of the bubble that I think they know their place. But if they decide to make some big swings here at the trade deadline, it's going to make their storyline really interesting heading into the end of the season. And if they push their way into the playoffs, I think you and I both agree it's not completely inconceivable. It just does feel even more unlikely than the Tampa Bay talk we just had, personally. But that's just me.
Yeah,
Um,
I'd say they're close, but yeah, same conversation.
yeah. Um, Good for them to go back to back, Dan. And honestly, I think I need to slide this at you. I believe you did get 2 consecutive picks there. Tell
I
me if
may
I'm
have.
crazy.
I
Yeah.
may have, so you can take the next two.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do
Make
that.
them
Let's
good,
get
Warren.
Well, let's make sure we get the lone bad team that miraculously found its way into the top 10 this week out of the way. Next, at number 7, I simply must make sure this is where the Los Angeles Angels live. And you could call me spiteful again because I know this is another team that I have personal disdain for after this week against my Mariners, but I'm not coming from that perspective. They made it this far. But at 7-3, you have to look at the results and go, well, the strength of schedule is questionable. Because Seattle's that bad right now. 6 of their 7 wins came against Seattle this week.
Yikes.
My heart. So I simply must.
Thank you, Seattle, for LA's trip up the power ranking.
Oh my God, literally, dude. And then
Yikes.
Oakland did take 2 of 3 against the Angels just to point out how bad Seattle is right now. So I will just throw that out there, Dan. I said enough already. I mean, we've talked about the same group of players in this LA pool that, are so exciting. The Kevin Pillar story and the fact that he might retire after this year, despite being such an important piece for this often exciting and energetic
Yeah.
little LA group is kind of a bummer. I would encourage him to think about getting one more year of himself out of the tank. But the theory is that Pilar might get moved along with a number of these other pieces, maybe a Willie Calhoun, who's also raised eyebrows impressively, or a Kevin Guillorme, or I don't know. I wouldn't want to get rid of too many of their youthful
Luis.
pieces. Right. I know people are talking like this might be the year Luis Rengifo gets moved from LA, but I think that'd be a mistake for the Angels to let that happen easily. He's one of those
I'd agree.
players. Yeah, he makes the contact reliably enough that he's more of a Luis Arias piece than he is like a Jose Altuve potentially.
Right.
Keep a player like that. You want to keep a player like that, guys. And, you want your Netos, you want your O'Hoppies, you want your Moniacs, you want your Shanuels, you want. Um, Too bad you can't find somebody to take Anthony Rendon. Talk to me about the Angels, Dan.
Well, it's worth mentioning Trout, dude. He was in Salt Lake, Warren. He was
I know.
prepping. He played 2 games, and then his knee was sore, and
Yeah.
now he's kicked back. He's probably going to miss 100 games for the 3rd time in the last 4 seasons.
Ugh.
Oh, we're reaching a dark part of this, and I feel like Trout might be mentally approaching a point where he's going to throw in the towel if he can't get a full season in soon. And that's just really sad. And it definitely pollutes the picture a little bit more because I think the Angels would have moved maybe an outfielder if Trout was coming back, but with him not, they probably won't. And honestly, with what they did at the deadline last year, I don't even know what to expect. I think the team would want to sell. I don't think the owner would let them sell. So very curious to see what they actually end up doing.
That's true. They're anomaly once again, and ownership and front office. Do they agree? Do they disagree? They disagree almost all the time. So you can't expect it to smell perfect coming out of the trade deadline for this team. And yes, Dan, I'm bummed about the Mike Trout thing, but I think we said it ourselves, man. He shouldn't be rushing himself to get back to this lineup.
True.
Take your time and feel great. I felt like they were rushing to get him back in so that the Los Angeles Angels can pretend like they have good news. And it's just not there. So yes, keep an eye on Trout's mental health. I mean, I've called that. I feel like he cares more about golf lately in the last couple seasons, and you can call me what you want, guys, if you agree or disagree, but I wouldn't blame him if he cannot stay healthy to quit barking up this tree at some point. So yes, you're pointing out a growing and potentially very sad storyline for those Angels fans who realize they still have like 6 more years of this guy, and he's not getting to play very many of the ones he's had recently. So, um, yeah, lots of question marks around the Angels as always. As always. Let's move into number 6, Dan. I'll do you the courtesy of continuing to just get some Western teams out of the way that you have little to no faith in. The Angels, of course, we all have little to no faith in. And how about those Arizona Diamondbacks at number 6? They went
Oh,
6.
wow. I got to say, Warren, I'm a little surprised. I was expecting somebody else there, but okay.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to see who you target next since I've gotten the last 2 picks, but I did feel like Arizona was appropriate. You've called them done, so why would you want to see them rise any higher? He called them done, guys, like 4 months ago. Like, it was crazy.
I mean, it's
I
true, but
I got to continue to point out that this is now above 500 team. Sure, 53 and 58, much above 500, but they're in the conversation, and we've heard from pundits they're buying. They are not selling. They did go 6-3 this week to match those, Oakland Athletics kind of teams. They didn't lose a single series. They went 2-1 against Toronto, 2-1 against the Cubs, 2-1 against the Royals. Good series wins across the board, especially against the Royals right at the moment. And they get ready to take on the Pirates, the Nationals, and the Pirates again next. So very interesting to see who wins those 2 series coming up against the Buccos. But anyway, the Diamondbacks are, they're putting it together enough that they are competitive, my guy. Ketel Marte's been the offensive heat pump, and then the other players around him are deciding who to step up at any given time to help this team win. And that's kind of how they got to the dance last year. So, Dano, I know what you're going to say, man. You still don't believe.
I don't believe.
So go ahead and say it.
I don't believe.
Okay.
All right, and we're done.
That's fine.
I think they're gonna buy, Warren. I think they should sell some pieces that aren't going to help them next year. And they might still do that, like in like a Suarez type who isn't really working out for them at this point, right?
Right.
And definitely starting pitching help they needed at this point. I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of on the edge. I'm caught back on what they should actually do. I could see good pieces out there that they could go after, like if they want to pay for like a Brent Rooker type or something like that. But I feel like this team is probably going to stand pat, probably not going to do anything too crazy, and it's probably going to be in a similar situation they are now, a couple games out of the wild card conversation. Like the Padres and the Dodgers are too competitive, and the rest of the National League I think is better on average than Arizona. I'm willing to say that the Mets are, at least. And along with St. Louis and Padres, those might be your wild cards right there. So if Arizona wants to get into the playoffs, I think they need to be aggressive at this deadline.
We'll see what they do. And we'll leave them at that because Dan has yet to be convinced and I have yet to be convinced they're out. So we'll just leave ourselves agreeing to disagree when it comes to ARZ. Go ahead, Dan. Take us into the next pick.
Yes, this is actually the team I was expecting for you to drop there, Warren. I probably would have had Arizona a little bit higher just in the quality of some of those matchups and that they didn't lose any series. But I can see where your head was probably at just off of the numbers. Let's go ahead with the Texas Rangers.
Ooh,
I get it, Warren. They had one more win, I guess. Whatever. They won a series against Houston. They took 2 out of 3 before the All-Star game. And despite their injuries, they had a number of representatives: Marcus Semien, Corey Seager, Kirby Yates. So they had obviously Garcia in the Derby. So they had a little bit of representation there. And like we saw probably from some of the other same situations, teams with multiple representatives came out a little bit cold. They lost a series to Baltimore, dropped 2 out of 3 before sweeping through the White Sox. And that's where it loses it for me, Warren. They lost to Baltimore, important series, important team that they need to be able to contend with. And then sweeping a team like the White Sox, a little bit less impressive to me. This team is still waiting on a lot of their injured players to come back. And this was a team that was actually, really interestingly, may have been the biggest seller at the deadline. Had they not won that series against Houston, had they not swept this Chicago team, they would be 5 games back, and they would 5 games under 500, I should say, and up to 8 or 9 games back. And they would probably be sellers. And if that were the case, they have a number of players that they could sell this year who have on expiring contracts, and then even a couple more with term if they really wanted to get a quick turnaround. It's more and more with every win seeming like that's not going to happen. And obviously, we've talked about the divisional race with Texas is very close. I'm curious to hear what you have to say about it, because I think Texas could probably be competitive with if they were to buy, but I still don't think they're better than Seattle or Houston, me personally.
No, that's fair. I mean, they do have a lot of young pieces who can swing bat better than my young pieces. An Evan Carter and Josh Smith. I mean, there's so many guys who I enjoy on that lineup. I'm a huge Jonah Heim fan, actually. I think I'm deciding I'm a catcher guy. I didn't know that, guys. Pause. It's but cool. I like catchers. And anyway. Yeah, I know. Like I said, cool. Pause. Leave it there. But Dan, here's what I'm going to say from a selfish standpoint. I want Texas to bite hard on their idea that they can win this still. And I want them to buy. And then I want them to fail. I want Seattle to make as little moves as possible if Texas ratchets up the aggression at the trade deadline, so that they can sink their battleship now and then look worse in future years. That's my hope, right? They just buy as much as they can now and fail to look good over the next couple of years because they invested too heavily in this, a season that hasn't largely looked like theirs to win. But you can also argue that if they walked into the season preparing to play the long game, like, the pundits have suggested, they've all been planning in Texas to get so many key players back right around now. And now it's happening, and now they're winning enough that they can look okay. Right. I feel like they're going to bite hard on the fact that they're looking this good right now because they just came out of 4 wins against, the White Sox, which, hey, look at us. We beat the White Sox. Let's invest, that's what I'm hoping will happen. However, both Seattle and Texas, I think, will probably do a little bit of both, a little bit of like buying a little bit and not as much as they could. But that's literally my speculation. So anything can happen. I wish Texas would bite hard, but I don't know if they will. I don't think they're as good as Houston. I don't think they're as good as Kansas. I don't think they're as good as Boston even. I don't think they're as good as Cleveland. I don't think they're as good as Baltimore. They could be about as, and New York in their best form would wipe the floor with the Rangers.
Yeah.
It's all about if Texas is better than Seattle at the moment. And the truth is their bats are better, their pitchers aren't, and they're neck and neck in terms of mediocrity in the long term of this season right now. Right. I would argue that Texas has more momentum, more intangibles. Let's see if they bite. I don't know if they'll bite, but I hope they do, so that they can look worse in the next couple of years for it. They do seem like a team that might decide to go that way. We shall see. We carry us into the final 4, ladies and gentlemen, top 4 teams left. And I'm trying to prolong the presence of one of them so that we're forced to talk about them in the top 3. So I will take another team that has gotten the top spot in the past and make sure they don't do it this time too. How about the San Diego Padres? Coming off their second franchise no.
Yeah.
Yes. Guys, it's Friday, July 26th. We're opening this show. But yesterday, Dylan Cease became the second transplanted pitcher to play in a Padres uniform and pump out a perfect game, or not a perfect game, but a no-hitter, joining Joe Musgrove in that distinction. That's just cool stuff. It feels great in your tum-tum to watch a San Diego Padres player scratch that off their professional checklist. And at 6-3 this week, the Padres were just darn good. And like you said, they are quite competitive in the NL West. Let's tell you why. They dropped 2 of 3 to Atlanta. Not helpful going into the All-Star break, but that's when everybody hits the reset button anyway. And when they did hit that reset button after 4 of their players got to play in the Midsummer Classic. Profar and Profar started, which warmed my heart. I know it did for
Yeah.
you. Luis Arias, Jackson Merrill, the rookie. That's right, Jackson Merrill. Good for him. Congratulations being in the dance. And Robert Suarez got to pitch a little bit. I mean, it's a feel good time for the Padres. They had a good weekend. Cleveland welcomed them out of the break, and they being the Padres took 2 of 3 from them to say, nope, we know what we're doing here. Coming out of the All-Star break, we're focused and we're playing well. And then we had a sweep of the Washington Nationals, who had just come off a sweep of their own against the Reds. So you could, think maybe they would have taken a game or two from the Padres, but no, Padres put them in their place and capped it off with that no in dominant fashion. It's just looked like such a good series for them against the Nationals. Have they found themselves, Dan? Have they found the version of San Diego Padre play that will carry them into the playoffs after all? How do you feel from your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's all coming together kind of at an opportune time. I think the offense is confident, and I think you really just need to invest in some pitching at the deadline here to try and make a good run for it. The division is maybe a little bit out of reach with the caliber that the Dodgers are keeping up to, but the wild card is right there. That's on the table. So I think they need to buy to stay in that conversation. And then you talk about some of those teams you'll be facing, like the Padres offense can match up against some of the best teams in the National League.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how much they need.
A starting pitcher just to close out a series, I think, is the last thing they would need to make you really confident, or a bullpen to support that. Like, I could see them doing that, but the price tags are so high, and I know the Padres have some good prospects that are going to be demanded. It's question is this the year they really want to do a deep investment and make a run? Like at the start of the year, we would have said no way, right? Like it didn't seem like it. It seemed like a down year, if anything.
Well, I had them in the playoffs, Dan.
Well, sure. I just meant compared to last year with Soto and the year before, like when they went to the NLCS. So it's an opportunity to go for that again. So I'd like to see them go after a starting pitcher. They're in on Skubal, they're in on Crochet. If they can get one of those guys, then I think that they're locked in for a wild card for sure.
Yeah. No arguments for me. I do think they're an arm away from feeling truly, truly powerful. Cease, King, Darvish, and blank, because it's not Musgrove, right?
No.
Need Uno Mas. There's plenty of arms out there that could just be available for this run. Maybe a Frank Montas could be a good choice if Cincinnati is really going to let themselves give up the ghost for this playoff race.
Yeah. Eric Feedy.
Well, yeah, I like Feedy a lot. I just think I think there's a better fit for Feedy, but that's just me wanting to play devil's advocate to you. I feel like if Feedy goes to a team really trying to solidify on the bubble, like maybe even a Seattle team can grab a Feedy. But we're talking a bubble team. I think a real contender like San Diego is going to swing even harder than that. So I'm expecting them to get like a name. I really am.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, with Cease, King, Darvish, and X, I would feel good in a playoff series for sure. And that X is somebody we know to be a good arm, a reliable arm, a sturdy arm. But I would expect San Diego in these playoffs. They feel like it. They're playing like it right now. And it's going to take them to have the wheels fall off. And I just don't see that happening right now. But anything can happen. There's enough season left. We know there's about 60 games per camp. Most teams are not out of the race. We'll just say that. Only teams like Colorado, Oakland, and the White Sox are, and Miami. Yeah. And that's it. Everybody else is still mathematically in it. Actually, even Oakland is, unfortunately, but we won't really underline that.
Yeah.
Okay, Dano, that's enough of that. The Padres take the 4th spot. 3 teams are left. I believe it is you who gets to shoot next.
And man, we got 4 National League teams in the top 4. Let me just say it's about time, okay, that we're getting the recognition. All right. And yeah, number 3, like I wish I could put them higher, but I'm happy to have them here. It's going to be the New York Mets.
Woo! dude, that's
Yeah.
three top three finishes or so in a
Dude,
row.
and I didn't think we'd do it this week, but I think we only had 3 teams with 6 wins, 2 teams with 7. So it really just worked out this way that the Mets were one of the better teams. You know, we won a series 2 out of 3 against Colorado. We talked about it, could have been a sweet one. Going into the All-Star break, All-Star game, Pete Alonso was pathetic in the home run derby. I think he was hanging out with the national anthem singer or something before the game, Warren, because it was not good.
His swing was off key, huh?
Yeah. But we came out of the break, split a series against Miami. Man, that was a close one because losing that series would have been very demoralizing. But luckily, we were able to get a split. It's against that strong, we talked about, Miami team. All of a sudden, the Jays. And then a sweep over the Yankees. We already talked about that too. So really good week for the Mets. They're carrying that momentum. I got to say, Francisco Lindor has been consistently good since he had a really slow start to the season through April into May. His June and July have been excellent. His batting average is approaching 300 again after being below 2 a few months ago. Senga should be back pretty soon, Warren. We're going to get into that 6-man rotation pretty quick here. Finally, right? I know. I feel like I've said it every episode, but the Mets are probably going to be in for a bullpen arm. They might still sell. I don't think we'll see a guy like Severino go because of the issues we've had with the rotation. So we might just hold on to some of our rentals. We're not going to move on JD or Pete. And I'd like to see Tanner Scott or one of those type of players come in, but we'll see what happens. I think the Mets are going to be in for a wild card, though.
It's fun to see them have stabilized their position. You know, they've been on a steady upward trend. There was a lot of shaky cultural questions earlier on in the season. And of course, the Pete Alonso relationship in general has been something we've circled around over and over again. Right. But we're 3 or 4 shows into a true solidification of these Mets as a team that knows what they're doing. And I'm super happy for you, my friend, especially when they got off to such a struggling start.
Right.
You know your team better than anybody, so shooting for a back of the bullpen arm like Tanner Scott makes perfect sense, and I wouldn't be surprised. Do you have enough capital, maybe? I'm going to throw this at you. Is there even a thought that you have enough stuff in your back pocket to give Oakland for Mason Miller?
Oh, man, I don't think we could pay the price because we've depleted a lot of talented prospects to the point now where we probably want to hold on to the ones that we have, the ones that they would ask for, you know? So, and plus with Diaz and Adam Ottavino kind of were our closing 1A, 1B. Diaz is back. Ottavino's kind of been pushed further into the bullpen, but there's hope he can get that. I don't think we're going to be in on somebody like that. But I will say, Warren, next year, whole new year, I think the Mets will be more aggressive for pieces like that. I think this year they know that they're not set up as well because of the slow start and that they could be more aggressive next year. Because really, the Mets need to figure out Pete Alonso before anything else. Like, that's number one, and then everything else we'll worry about.
Michael Kopech, Kyle Finnegan, maybe even Carlos Estevez, as I bring up a list of relief arms that could be available. I mean, Estevez feels like a glass reliever in my mind. I know he's playing for the Angels and Kamehamehaing his way to plenty of wins, but I feel like I don't know. I feel like it's pity victories, like players or teams just let Estevez beat them. You know what I mean? I don't know if he's that good is what I'm really trying to say, but those are the kinds of names to think about. You know, Trevor Rogers comes to mind, Austin Adams out there in the athletic land. So even if you don't go for the biggest name, it would take, you know, just 1 or 2 to shore up your bullpen before you would feel like that weakness is filled up. Yeah. Cool. Well, Dan, I'll pray for you, man. We're just 5 days away from knowing the final form of these Mets, and it would be fun to see them surprise everybody, including you and I, and push their way into the playoffs. It's not out of the question, and they've been playing that way for the last month or so. All right. Top 2 teams. We need to bring it home strong, and I am so excited to talk about this next team because it forces you to talk about a team I know you're not prepared to talk about at the top, which is funny. You should be putting me in an uncomfortable position. So do we need to check our format? Do you want to give the number 2 team, dude? Because I should be the one who's uncomfortable this week talking about.
Honestly, I wouldn't want to talk about either of these teams, so you're good.
Okay, I think I do need to be the one to eat the crow on the Los Angeles Dodgers at number 2 at this stage this week, because guys, I know Seattle's such a punchline. I get it. The biggest reason why they're the punchline this weekend is because Teoscar Hernandez won the Royal Rumble. Oops, the home run derby, guys. The first Dodger to win the home run derby is the guy Seattle didn't want to pay $20 million to retain last offseason in Teoscar Hernandez.
How violently were you shaking, Warren, as you watched it?
You know, Tiffany, my fiance, guys, who's just as abreast with baseball as Dan and I is, was like, "Are you feeling okay?" while we were watching it. And I have to be honest with you, I have plenty of respect for Teoscar Hernandez. I'm happy for him because he's been wanting to play in this event for years, and he comes in as the most focused on winning, and he does it. And I'm super happy for him. Am I bitter because Seattle didn't pay him? Yes and no. The truth is, as I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I just don't think he liked playing in Seattle all that much. And I don't think a lot of players out there want to play in Seattle. And that breaks my heart because I love my home city and I love my home stadium and I love my home team. But it's rainy and it's a different kind of culture out there. And I don't think it sits well with a lot of the sluggers who want to go in there and get their numbers. And that's been who Teo has been for the Dodgers this year. And, I wish he could have been that for us even more than he was last year, but I don't think he wanted to be. And I cannot make somebody want to play their best for my team. So I can't do that. I'm not that salty. Kudos to you for getting what you wanted out of your career there on that one, the Teoscar Hernandez. Kudos on being the first Dodger to hoist that. And I just think it's cool for him. I'm really not that salty. The Dodgers had a good week at 7-3. They dropped 2 of 3 to Detroit, limping into the All-Star break, but then came back in full force, taking all 3 opportunities away from Boston in Fenway, and what was honestly maybe the biggest surprise series result of our coverage this week, just because Boston's been playing so hot and looked like they could get a punch against the Dodgers anyway. And then they took 3 of 4 from the Giants, the divisional rival that they need to take those kind of results from in order to meet expectation and then some. So just Dodger doing Dodger stuff. I've taken too much time already. What's your impression of the Dodgers, Dan?
Well, they DFA James Paxton. They'll probably try and move him. That'll be a cheap little piece they can send out while they're getting something bigger back in. Mm-hmm. So we'll probably see a rotation piece. That's been their biggest issue. The health, they just cannot stay healthy this year. And so they're going to be in on a lot of different guys. Bullpen too. Like if they sweep in and take Tanner Scott from the Mets, I'm going to be so annoyed, Warren. And I'll be equally annoyed if they take, Jazz from you or something like that, because I feel like they got their fingers in everything. So this Dodger team, we talked a lot about it. No need to rehash some of the same stuff. I see them reinforcing just a little bit to continue a run. They look like they'll be daunting in the postseason. There's no doubt. And if they really think, okay, this is a year where we're looking at it, we think we can beat these NL teams, we can go to the World Series, then I expect them to make multiple moves. But I wouldn't be surprised if they're a little bit calmer. They make moves that'll help them for next year, and they really plan on that. We've talked about how their pitching situation is going to improve a lot next year. So it might not be a good idea to spend too much on rentals if you can make a better team for next year. So we'll see what the Dodgers do.
I'm in agreement with you that it's frustrating to see a team be able to put all of their fingers into all of the, bowls and taste all of the different wares before they make their final decisions. And I don't blame us who feel frustrated for the accessibility the Dodgers have to the rest of the league. New York is a team like that too. Historically, Boston and Philadelphia and Atlanta and blah, 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 blah. Same group, right? So here's what I would want to say, though, is that the Dodgers are a team, and maybe the only team, correct me if I'm wrong quickly, that is controlled by a collection of companies, right? They're funded by a collection of a metropolis of investors. If you can't beat them, join them, is what I would say. If we really want to turn the corner to the most competitive version of Major League Baseball out there, then maybe we just need to see other teams adopt this mold, which makes it easier for these various teams to get managed capably. If you think about it, more cooks in the kitchen can build a better team, different perspectives and different cash pools coming together. I don't know, man. If the Dodgers are really making everybody else mad, then the rest of us should figure out how to follow them. That's all I'm saying.
You're right.
And that's just the way it goes. And I think if either Major League Baseball eventually adopts a salary cap of some kind, and I'm sure we can have a whole hour-long discussion on how we feel about this after the season, Dan, and I'd love to. Either a salary cap comes at some point to equalize competition, or I think we all just need to start smelling what's cooking, and teams need to put together ownership groups that are more than just a single cash load paying it, because it's working for the Dodgers and it's going to continue to work for them until they finally get what they know they want, which is a non-pandemic championship.
Yes.
Their first since 1988. So it's been a long time coming. They're waiting for it. It just doesn't. Let's see if this is the year. Okay, Dan, I know that you've been patiently waiting for the opportunity to talk about your favorite team of the week, the last remaining option. It is another first-time number one team of the week, and it's so much fun finding ways to justify certain camps to climb this mountain. Hey, let's grab the shovel, head down to the beach, stick it in the sand, and get the dirt off of our number one team this week. Give it to us, Dan.
The Pittsburgh Pirates.
Let's
dig them up. Find the treasure, because they are definitely the number one team in vibes for these past couple weeks, Warren, because they swept the Chicago White Sox going into the All-Star game. They had Brian Reynolds and Skeens, the starter of the NL. I mean, absolutely pop off. And then they came out of it and they kept it going, Warren. A series win against Philadelphia took 2 out of 3. A series win against St. Louis, 2 out of 3. That put them right in the conversation for the wild card. They are a game and a half back right now and right behind St. Louis. And at this point, I had Pittsburgh is probably buying and selling a little bit, moving some older pieces, like maybe getting a couple rentals, but mostly stuff with term. At this point, the playoffs are very much in reach. And, we're not talking about a long run, but a young team like this, we talked about it with like the Royals and with some of these other teams. You got to get some playoff experience. Baltimore last year is a good example. Like, just get them in the dance, get them a series. Maybe they're not going to win it, but it will go so much further if you can improve the team for next year. So hopefully Pittsburgh's a little aggressive and they actually stay in this dance for wild card. Your prediction, Warren, at the start of the year, it might not be as wrong as we thought.
Well, I crashed and burned on the O'Neill Cruz half. That's fine. Sure. But Pittsburgh's playing capable baseball, and the buzz it gives me goosebumps to watch Pittsburgh appreciate home baseball. They have one of the best ballparks as far as the vistas you can enjoy while you take in 9 innings. And on top of that, they have one of the more exciting starting rotations in the league, period. Utterly fantastic to see what they've been able to generate with the Skeens heat and fun. I'm sorry, guys, for whatever interference is getting in the way. I'm not sure. That being said, Pittsburgh has been fun to point out as plucky and surprisingly potent from time to time, but they're putting it together, especially right now. And can they hold it? Can it stay true? Will they fall off in September like I talked about? The questions can all be answered affirmative or negative given the next couple of weeks and months. It's still up in the air. It's still real, is the point. Like, this is not your basement Pittsburgh team we've gotten to know and feel sorry for the better part of the last, 8 or 9 years since they made their last appearance in 2015 and what I think was just a wild card game write-off. Like, it's not like they did anything interesting. So point is, guys, I'm happy for Pittsburgh. I argued with Dan at the beginning of the season that maybe this lineup had more up their sleeve than we thought they did, and it's proving to be true. And if they can keep this momentum and stay healthy, they could very well sneak into the playoffs for the first time in those 9 years. And who wouldn't be happy for Pittsburgh if that comes to pass? So we'll just put it out there over the next 5 days that maybe they shore up the possibility of that happening. If not this year, then in the next 2 or 3. They are a deserved number one team, guys. They truly won the most at 7 games, tied, that is, and lost the least over the last 10 games. So this is not an anomaly, man. This is real. They earned this. And we'll see if the Pittsburgh Pirates can stay afloat and raise the Jolly Roger as we head into the trade deadline. And that completes this week's anti-rankings. Week 15, we called it. I'm sure that's a wrong number, but this is what maybe
long
our
weeks.
Long weeks, guys. This is our 20th show or so. We want to thank you guys for listening. Thank you for giving us all the feedback you have and letting us get to this point where now we've got some production value and a little ticker at the bottom. Just know we love you. We're so grateful you tune in for these shows, and let us higher than number 30. Let us know in the comments below if at number 20, the team that preceded the Baltimore Orioles. You make me so mad, Dan, that they're number 19, those Orioles. But the Cleveland Guardians at number 20, are they in trouble of falling out of the playoff picture? We need to know how you feel about it. At number 10, ladies and gentlemen, just outrunning those Kansas City Royals at number 11 are the Milwaukee Brewers, in even greater danger of losing their Central Division. Yikes, it's scary to be a Brewer right at the moment. At number 5 are the Texas Rangers, finally figuring it out. Is the master plan finally coming together? Is the health going to pay off for those Rangers, and will they return to defend their championships? We'll find out. Or will it be the Pittsburgh Pirates who sneak into the playoff race, our number 1 team this week, proving that they can recapture glory from 8 years ago and make it into the dance? We'll find out, guys. But this has been Covering Our Bases. Dan, anything for our fans before we say goodbye?
No, thanks for tuning in and give us feedback, comments. Like, we're working on these rankings and we want to know what you guys want to see.
Absolutely. Let us know how you like the production. Hopefully next week it'll be blue and teal for my Mariners and we'll bounce back and have a good week. But somehow I doubt it. This has been Covering Our Bases, and we will see you guys next time we take a trip around those bases. Goodbye, guys.